You've arrived at MrDantello, a calm, scary stories channel for late hours. Tonight's video features ghosts and haunted places, designed to help you unwind. If you enjoy listening, like, subscribe, and comment your location. Let the stories begin. Story 1. The ghost in my basement won't stop rearranging my furniture. I bought the house on Holloway Street because it was the only place I could afford after the divorce. Not that afford is the right word, more like it was the only property the bank would let me assume after my credit collapsed, my savings evaporated, and my ex walked out with everything except the dented Honda and a box of my grandfather's old tools. The realtor called it a fixer-upper with character. What she meant was it was falling apart, smelled faintly of mildew and regret, and had been on the market for 18 months because no one in their right mind would touch it. But I wasn't in my right mind. I was numb, hollowed out, the kind of exhausted that makes even breathing feel like a chore. So when I saw the listing, 3 bedrooms, detached garage, full basement, $129,000, I didn't ask why it was so cheap. I didn't tour the neighborhood. I didn't run a background check on the house's history. I just signed the papers, handed over the cashier's check from the last of my emergency fund, and moved in with 2 suitcases and a bottle of cheap bourbon. The first week was quiet, too quiet. No birds in the yard, no wind in the trees. Even the refrigerator hummed at a lower pitch than normal, like it was trying not to disturb something. The house sat at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by overgrown oaks whose branches scraped the roof at night like skeletal fingers testing the shingles. The backyard sloped down into a ravine choked with brambles, and beyond that, nothing, just woods, miles of them. I set up my bedroom on the first floor, didn't even go upstairs. The basement door, tucked under the stairs in the kitchen, stayed shut. It was an old-fashioned hatch with a rusted iron latch and a faded warning painted in flaking red letters. Keep closed. Draft risk. I assumed it was a relic from the 1940s when the house was built. Maybe the previous owners were paranoid about cold air. Or maybe they just didn't want kids wandering down there. I didn't plan to open it. But on the 8th night, I came home from my new job, stocking shelves at a hardware store, to find my living room rearranged. Not someone broke in and trashed the place rearranged. Deliberately rearranged. My thrift store armchair, which I placed facing the window so I could watch the sunset, was now angled toward the basement door. The coffee table had been shifted 6 inches to the left. The rug, crooked before, was now perfectly aligned with the floorboards. Even the lamp on the side table had been rotated so its neck pointed downward, casting a narrow pool of light directly onto the hatch. I stood in the doorway, my grocery bag dangling from my hand, heart pounding. I live alone. I locked the doors. I didn't touch anything. I checked the windows, all latched. The back door, dead bolted. Nothing was missing. Nothing broken. Just moved. I told myself it was muscle memory, sleepwalking, stress-induced disorientation. I'd been drinking more than usual. Maybe I'd done it myself and forgotten. But the next morning, I found my kitchen chairs pushed neatly under the table, something I never do. My dishes, which I'd left stacked in the sink, were rinsed and placed in the drying rack in perfect order, and the broom, which lived in the pantry, was standing upright in the corner of the hallway, facing the basement door like a sentry. That's when I decided to go down. I grabbed a flashlight, unlatched the hatch, and pulled. The stairs groaned like old bones. The air that rose from below was cool, dry, and carried the scent of cedar and something else, faintly sweet, like dried flowers left in a closed drawer for decades. The basement was unfinished, concrete floor, exposed joists, a single bare bulb hanging from a cord in the center, though I hadn't turned it on. Yet it glowed with a soft amber light, and the space was furnished, not with boxes or junk, with my furniture. My old reading chair, the one I'd left in storage, sat in the far corner, perfectly positioned beneath a cobwebbed window well. My grandmother's oak side table stood beside it, holding a chipped porcelain teacup I hadn't seen since I was 12. Even the lamp, that damn lamp, was there, its shade tilted just so. But I hadn't brought any of this down. I hadn't even unpacked it. I backed up the stairs so fast I nearly fell. I slammed the hatch shut and shoved a kitchen chair under the handle. That night, I slept with the lights on. The rearranging didn't stop. It escalated. Every morning I'd wake to find my belongings subtly altered, books reshelved by publication date instead of author, my shoes lined up by size and color, the couch cushions fluffed and rotated. Once I came home to find my entire work uniform, jeans, flannel, steel-toed boots, laid out on the bed as if someone expected me to leave and never return. But the basement, that was the worst, because now things were coming up. A hand-knit blanket appeared on my bed, my mother's, lost in the move. A music box I'd owned as a child sat on the windowsill, its lid open, playing a warped lullaby at 3 a.m. And one morning, I found a framed photograph on my nightstand, me at age 7, sitting on a swing in a backyard I didn't recognize, smiling beside a woman who wasn't my mother. On the back, in faded ink, "Don't forget us." I called the county clerk, ran property records. The house was built in 1942 by a man named Walter Gable. He lived there with his wife Eleanor and their daughter Clara. Clara died in 1953 at age 9. Pneumonia, the death certificate said. Walter hanged himself in the basement 3 months later. Eleanor vanished shortly after. No body was ever found. The house changed hands 6 times. Each owner reported odd occurrences. One family claimed their furniture moved overnight. Another said they'd hear footsteps pacing the basement. A woman in the 1980s reported seeing a little girl in a yellow dress standing at the foot of her bed, whispering, "Make it tidy. He likes it tidy." I should have left, but where would I go? I had no money, no friends, and part of me, the broken, lonely part, was starting to like the attention. Someone was caring for me. Someone was watching. Someone knew me. Then came the night I found the note. It was tucked into my coat pocket, a coat I hadn't worn in weeks. The paper was yellowed, the handwriting delicate and lupin. "You're not sleeping well. The bed's too hard. I'll fix it tomorrow." I didn't touch the mattress the next day, but when I came home from work, the bed was made with fresh sheets, cotton, soft, smelling of lavender. The pillows were plumped, the duvet folded at the foot, and on the ejado nightstand, a glass of water and 2 aspirin. I sat on the edge of the bed and cried for the first time since the divorce, because it was kind, because it was familiar, because for the first time in years I didn't feel alone. That night I left the basement door open, just a crack. I sat in the living room with the lights off, listening. At 11:37 p.m. I heard it. a soft creak from below, then the scrape of wood on concrete, then silence. I crept to the top of the stairs and peered down. The basement light was on, and there she was, a woman in a faded floral dress, her back to me, kneeling beside the armchair. She was smoothing the fabric, tucking a loose thread back into the seam. Her hair was silver, pulled into a loose bun. She moved with quiet precision, like someone who'd spent a lifetime caring for things that couldn't care back. "Eleanor?" I whispered. She froze. Slowly she turned. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and dark, too dark, like pools of ink. But her expression wasn't angry. It was sad, longing. "You look tired," she said, her voice soft as dust falling from a shelf. "You should rest." I don't understand," I stammered. "Why are you doing this?" She stood, brushing her hands on her dress. "Walter couldn't stand mess. After Clara, he needed everything, perfect. Like if the world stayed in place, she might come back." She looked around the basement, my furniture arranged in a perfect circle, as if waiting for a seance. "I stayed to keep it that way," she said, "for him, for her, and now for you." "Why me?" She smiled faintly. "Because you don't take care of yourself, because you leave your shoes in the hall and your coffee cups on the sill and your heart in a box under the bed, because you need someone to tidy your life." I didn't run. I walked down the stairs. She didn't vanish, didn't recoil. She just watched me, eyes glistening. "I'm not staying forever," I said. "I know," she replied, "but while you're here, let me help." And I did. Over the next weeks, I stopped fighting it. I'd come home to find my laundry folded, my mail sorted, my keys hanging on the hook by the door. My plants were watered. My coffee was ground and ready in the filter, and every night the basement light would glow softly, and I'd hear the quiet sounds of someone arranging, cleaning, caring. I started leaving notes. "Thank you for the soup." "The blanket helped. I slept well." "You didn't have to fix the faucet, but I appreciate it." She never wrote back, but the next morning the notes would be gone, and something new would appear. A book I'd mentioned wanting to read, a packet of seeds for the garden, a framed photo of me smiling that I didn't remember taking. I was happier than I'd been in years. But then one night I woke to the sound of weeping, not angry, not scared, just deep, aching sorrow. It came from the basement. I went down without hesitation. Eleanor was sitting in the armchair, clutching a child's dress to her chest, yellow with tiny white flowers. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "I miss her," she whispered, not looking up. "Every day, every hour. I tidy the world, but I can't tidy the hole she left." I sat on the floor beside her. "I know," I said. "I lost someone too." She finally looked at me. "You can leave, you know. Walk out that door and never come back. You're not like Walter. You don't have to stay." "I don't want to leave," I said, and I meant it. But the next morning, everything changed. The furniture upstairs was gone, not stolen, not moved. Vanished. The living room was empty, except for the bare floorboards. The kitchen, no table, no chairs. My bed, stripped to the mattress. Even the curtains were gone. I ran to the basement. It was full. Every piece of furniture I owned was down there, arranged in a tight spiral around the center of the room. The chairs faced inward. The lamps cast long, overlapping shadows. And in the middle, on a small stool, sat the yellow dress. A note lay on top. He's coming back tonight. He doesn't like mess. You have to choose. Stay and be tidy, or leave and be free. I realized then what she'd been protecting me from. Not the ghost. Herself. Walter wasn't the only one who couldn't let go. Eleanor had been trapping souls here for decades. Anyone broken, anyone lonely, turning them into permanent residents of her curated afterlife. A perfect, silent world where nothing was out of place and nothing ever changed. I ran upstairs, packed what little I had left, clothes, laptop, my grandfather's tools. I was at the front door when the clock struck midnight. Behind me, every door in the house slammed shut. The lights went out. From the basement, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, male, and a woman's voice pleading, "Please, not him, take me instead." I turned the knob. It wouldn't budge. The windows fogged over. In the glass, a reflection appeared, not mine. A man in a worn suit, rope burns around his neck, eyes hollow. He pointed to the basement. "Come down," a voice whispered, not from the stairs, but from inside my own skull. "Stay. Be tidy. Be still." I looked at the door, then at the basement, and I made my choice. I walked down the stairs, not because I wanted to stay, but because I couldn't leave her alone with him. Now I live in the basement. Eleanor and I rearrange the furniture every night. We wait for the next broken soul to stumble through the door. And when they do, we make it tidy. Because that's what we do. That's who we are. And the house is always hungry for someone to care for. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. I went to a hotel and the guest registry listed my name. Checked in 3 weeks before I'd even booked the room. The rain wasn't supposed to start until midnight. That's what the weather app promised as I pulled off the interstate. Tires hissing on the slick asphalt of Route 9. But the sky had other plans. By the time I spotted the flickering neon sign, the Blackwell Inn, vacancy, it was a deluge, hammering the roof of my aging sedan like frantic fists. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. 300 miles of driving after the funeral. 300 miles of replaying my sister Lily's voice on the last voicemail I never returned. "Hey, just checking in. Call me back when you land?" I never called. I'd been in a meeting. By the time I saw the message, she was already gone. An aneurysm, silent, swift, the kind that doesn't give you time to say goodbye. The grief was a physical ache behind my ribs, a hollow space that made the road blur. I needed walls, a door I could lock anywhere but the echoing silence of my empty apartment. The Blackwell Inn wasn't on my usual route. It wasn't on any app. It just appeared. A squat 3-story brick building hunched beside the highway exit, its windows dark eyes reflecting the storm. The vacancy light buzzed and spat sparks against the downpour. I turned in. The lobby smelled of lemon-scented disinfectant and damp wool, undercut by something older, deeper. The scent of dust motes, dancing in stale air, the faint, dry sweetness of forgotten cigars. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly greenish pallor on the cracked linoleum floor. Behind a scarred oak reception desk sat a man. He was old, 70s maybe, but unnaturally still. His thin white hair was combed meticulously over a liver-spotted scalp. Wire-rimmed glasses, magnified eyes that held no warmth, only a flat, watchful stillness. His name tag read, Mr. Vaughn. He didn't look up as I approached, his gnarled hands smoothing the pages of a massive leather-bound ledger open before him. The pen in his right hand was an antique fountain pen, its nib glinting under the lights. Rainwater dripped from my hair onto the counter as I cleared my throat. "Need a room," I said, my voice rough from hours of silence and swallowed tears. "Just for tonight." Vaughn's head lifted slowly like a mechanism rusted shut. His magnified eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. He didn't smile, didn't ask my name. He simply reached beneath the desk and slid a heavy brass key across the polished wood. It landed with a soft clunk. Attached to it was a tarnished fob stamped with the number 3 Ponteron. His hand retreated. He picked up the fountain pen and dipped it deliberately into an inkwell I hadn't noticed, a small obsidian pot that seemed to swallow the light. He began writing in the ledger, the nib scratching loudly in the quiet lobby. Scritch, scritch, scritch. "Payment?" I ventured, fumbling for my wallet. He didn't pause his writing. "Prepaid." His voice was a dry rustle, like pages turning in an empty attic. "By the previous guest." I frowned, laying 2 20s on the ledger beside his hand. He didn't acknowledge the money. His pen moved with deliberate strokes. I leaned slightly, curiosity overriding fatigue. The ledger page was dense with cramped handwriting, names, dates, room numbers. My eyes skipped down the columns. And then I saw it. October 12th, room 314, Eleanor Shaw. Check-in, 8:47 p.m. October 12th. 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks before. Lily died. 3 weeks before I'd even considered this detour, this storm, this crushing need to drive until my hand stopped shaking. My breath hitched. I stared at the name. Eleanor Shaw. My name, my handwriting. I'd recognize the loop of my E, the sharp angle of my W anywhere. But I hadn't written this. I hadn't been here 3 weeks ago. I'd been in Seattle, closing the biggest deal of my career, ignoring Lily's increasingly worried texts about our mother's health. I hadn't returned her one voicemail. I hadn't been here. I looked up, pulse hammering in my throat. This can't be right. That's my name, but I wasn't here on the 12th. I've never been here before tonight. Vaughn didn't stop writing. His pen scratched on, adding more details beneath my name. Duration, 1 night. Paid in full. "The registry doesn't lie, Miss Shaw," he murmured, his voice devoid of inflection. He finally looked up, those magnified eyes holding mine. There was no surprise in them, only a terrible, patient knowing. "It records what will be, what must be." He closed the ledger with a soft thud, the leather cover swallowing the sound. "Room 309, 3rd floor, end of the hall. The elevator is out of order, stairs only." He slid the brass key toward me again. It felt colder this time, unnaturally cold, like it had been pulled from a freezer. "Your room has been waiting." I took the key. The brass was tarnished almost black in places, worn smooth on the teeth by countless hands. It felt heavier than it should. I forced my voice steady. "I think I'd like a different room. Ground floor, something quieter." A flicker of something, almost like pity, crossed Vaughn's impassive face. He shook his head slowly, a stiff, mechanical movement. "Room 314 is reserved for you. It has always been reserved for you. The key wouldn't fit any other lock." He tapped the closed ledger with a yellowed fingernail. "The registry knows. It always knows who belongs where." I wanted to argue, to demand a refund, to walk out into the storm. But the weight of the day, the grief, the exhaustion, the sheer impossibility of driving another mile in this deluge pressed down on me. The key felt like an anchor in my palm. "Fine," I muttered, turning away before he could see the tears welling in my eyes. "Just fine." The staircase was narrow, carpeted in a faded, muddy brown pattern designed to hide stains. The air grew colder with each step, thick with the smell of old dust and something faintly metallic, like dried blood masked by the lemon cleaner. The third-floor hallway stretched into gloom, lit only by widely spaced wall sconces that flickered erratically. My footsteps were swallowed by the thick carpet. Room 314 was at the very end. The door was heavy, solid core wood, painted a chipped institutional green. I inserted the brass key. It turned smoothly, silently. The lock clicked open. The room was small, sterile, a narrow bed with stiff polyester sheets, a dresser with a dead television bolted to it, a window overlooking the rain-lashed parking lot and the dark tree line beyond. The shower curtain in the tiny bathroom was mildewed at the hem. Standard issue. Except for one thing. On the bedside table sat a single item, a small framed photograph. Not hotel decor. Mata's breath caught. It was a picture of Lily and me, taken last summer at her cabin on Lake Serene. We were laughing, arms around each other's shoulders, the late afternoon sun catching the spray from the dock where we'd just jumped in. I hadn't brought this photo with me. I hadn't seen it since the funeral. I picked it up. The glass was cold. The frame was damp, as if it had been left out in the rain. Taped to the back was a slip of hotel stationery. In my own handwriting, the same looping E, the sharp W, it read, "Ellie." I waited. The water was cold. It's always colder than you think. Don't make me wait alone. My hands shook. I dropped the frame. It hit the carpet with a soft thud, the glass miraculously unbroken. Lily's smiling face stared up at the ceiling. I backed away, heart hammering against my ribs. Impossible. A cruel trick. A sick coincidence. I locked the deadbolt, clicked off the bedside lamp, and fell onto the bed fully clothed. The brass key clutched so tightly in my fist, its teeth imprinted my palm. Sleep wouldn't come. The rain drummed on the roof. The radiator under the window hissed and clanked, a sound like slow, wet breathing, and beneath it all, a new sound. Faint at first, then clearer, the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water falling into a sink. But a bathroom door was closed. The sound was coming from inside the room. From the corner near the dresser, I turned on the lamp. Nothing, just shadows. I turned it off. Drip, drip, drip. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing sleep. Lily's voice whispered in the dark, not from the corner, but from the space behind my own eyes. "You didn't answer, Ellie. You never answer." Dawn light, gray and watery, filtered through the gap in the thin curtains. I sat up instantly, stiff and hollow-eyed. The photograph was gone. The bedside table was empty. Relief washed over me, thin and shaky. A nightmare. Just grief. Playing tricks. I showered quickly. The water, tepid and gritty, scrubbing the chill from my skin. I needed coffee. Normalcy. I grabbed my suitcase, eager to flee this room, this hotel, this suffocating sense of being watched. As I passed the reception desk on my way out, Vaughn was there. He didn't look up from the ledger. I placed the heavy brass key on the counter. "Check out," I said, my voice flat. He didn't acknowledge the key. His pen was moving again, scratching across a fresh page. "Room 314. Duration 1 night. Paid in full." He paused, dipped his pen in the obsidian inkwell. We'll be returning on November 5th. Same room, same key. My blood turned to ice. No, I won't be back, ever. Vaughn finally lifted his head. Those magnified eyes held no anger, only a terrible certainty. The registry doesn't lie, Miss Shaw. November 5th is the anniversary. The water remembers anniversaries. He tapped the ledger. Your sister's silence began that day. The Blackwell feeds on unfinished silences, on the spaces between heartbeats, between messages left unheard. He pushed a slip of paper across the counter. It was a photocopy of the ledger page. There, in crisp black ink beneath my name and the October 12th date, was a new entry. November 5th, room 314, Eleanor Shaw. Check-in, 8:47 p.m. I snatched the paper, crumpling it in my fist. This is insane. I never booked a room for November 5th. I don't even know where this place is. Vaughn's dry chuckle was the sound of twigs snapping underfoot. You found us tonight. You'll find us again. The key knows the way. It always knows the way back to the silence you carry. He closed the ledger. The cover was cold, smooth leather. Drive safely, Miss Shaw. The road is long. The water is patient. He turned away, polishing the obsidian inkwell with a cloth that absorbed the light. I drove east, away from the storm, away from the highway, away from the Blackwell Inn's flickering neon sign that seemed to burn behind my eyelids. I drove through the day, through the night, stopping only for gas and black coffee. I deleted the hotel's location from my phone. I threw the crumpled ledger page out the window at a rest stop in Indiana. I told myself it was stress, grief, hallucination, a weird old man playing mind games. But the brass key was still in my pocket. I hadn't left it on the counter. My fingers had closed around it instinctively as I fled. It felt warm now, pulsing faintly against my thigh like a second heartbeat. 3 weeks later, the rain returned. Not a downpour, a persistent cold drizzle that turned autumn leaves into slick black confetti on the highway. November 5th, Lily's death anniversary. I hadn't planned to drive. I'd planned to stay home, light a candle, finally listen to that last voicemail I'd saved but never played. But the silence in my apartment had grown teeth. It gnawed at the edges of my sanity, filled with the phantom drip, drip, drip of water and the echo of Lily's unspoken words. I got in my car, not east, west, toward the mountains, toward anywhere but here. The GPS rerouted me around a landslide. The new route was unfamiliar, winding through valleys thick with fog. The headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating skeletal trees, and then, through the downpour, the sign flickered into view. The Blackwell Inn, vacancy, neon buzzing, spitting sparks against the storm, exactly as before. I slammed on the brakes, tires skidding on the wet asphalt. My hands were numb on the wheel. I hadn't taken this exit. I hadn't even seen the turnoff. But here it was, the only light for miles, the only refuge from the crushing silence of the road. Vaughn was behind the desk. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look up. The leather-bound ledger lay open before him. He slid the same heavy brass key across the counter. The fob read, 3 ta. His pen was already poised, nib wet with black ink. Room 314, Miss Shaw. Paid in full. The registry awaits. I didn't argue. I didn't speak. I took the key. It was warm, almost hot. It vibrated faintly in my palm. The stairs felt steeper this time, colder. The drip, drip, drip started before I reached the 3rd floor. Louder, closer. Room 314's door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The room wasn't sterile. It was Lily's bedroom from when we were kids. The faded flowered wallpaper, the twin bed with the patchwork quilt, the small desk littered with half-finished sketches, Lily's dream of being an artist. Rain streaked the window, but outside wasn't the parking lot. It was the view from her cabin window, Lake Serene, dark and still under the stormy sky. And in the center of the room, standing with her back to me, was Lily. She wore the oversized flannel shirt she always slept in, her dark hair pulled into a messy ponytail. She was humming softly, a tune our mother used to sing. The drip, drip, drip came from the corner. A small, rusty bucket sat on the floor, catching water from a leak in the ceiling. Each drop landed with a soft, final plink. "Lily?" My voice was a broken whisper. She turned. Her face was pale, waterlogged. Her eyes were the color of the lake on a still morning, deep, endless gray. But her smile was Lily's, soft, sad, understanding. "You came back," she said. Her voice wasn't from her throat. It came from the dripping bucket, from the rain on the window, from the space between my own heartbeats. "I knew you would. The water called you. It always calls the ones who leave silence behind." Tears streamed down my face. "I'm so sorry, Lily. I didn't hear your message. I was in a meeting. I thought there'd be more time." She stepped closer. Her feet made no sound on the worn rug. Her skin smelled of lake water and wet stone. "There's always more time in the Blackwell, Ellie. Time to fill the silence. Time to answer the messages." She reached out a hand. It was cold, transparent at the edges. "The registry knew. It knew you'd need a place to say the things you never said. A place where the silence isn't empty. It's waiting." She gestured toward the dripping bucket. "The water holds the words we never speak. It holds the goodbyes. It holds me." The room shimmered. The childhood bedroom dissolved like mist. The lake view vanished. I stood in the sterile motel room again. Stiff sheets, dead TV, mildewed shower curtain. But the dripping bucket remained in the corner. Lily stood beside it, her form flickering like a bad signal. The brass key in my pocket burned hot. Vaughn's voice echoed from the hallway, dry and final. "The key fits all doors here, Miss Shaw, especially the locked ones, especially the doors to the silence." Lily's hand closed over mine. Her touch was the chill of deep water. "Stay, Ellie, just for tonight. The water is warm here, warmer than you think. It remembers how to hold you." Her eyes held the flat, watchful stillness of Vaughn's. "The registry is never wrong. It knew you'd come back to finish what you started, to answer the call." The dripping bucket filled. The water rose, clear and dark, reflecting the flickering ceiling light. It reflected Lily's face. It reflected my own. And as I stared into that rippling surface, not at my reflection, but at the space between the drops, I saw it. The date. November 5th, room 314, Eleanor Shaw. Check-in 8:47 p.m. But below it, written in water that didn't disturb the surface, were new words. Duration. Permanent. Paid in full. Lily's hand tightened on mine. The water in the bucket overflowed, spilling silently across the carpet, cold and deep. It didn't soak my shoes. It rose around my ankles, my knees, thick as silence, pulling me down. The last thing I saw before the water closed over my head was the brass key floating on the surface. It glowed faintly green, and in its reflection, in the dark water of the bucket, I saw Vaughn's face, not at the desk, standing behind me in the flooded room. His magnified eyes held no pity now, only hunger. He dipped his fountain pen into the water and began to write on the surface of the flood. Room 314 is now occupied. I didn't drown. I floated in the warm, silent dark. The water held me like a promise, like a goodbye finally spoken. The dripping stopped. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of Lily's laughter, full of the messages I never answered, full of the weight I'd carried since the phone call that changed everything. The brass key pressed against my chest, warm and heavy, an anchor, a tether. The current carried me gently toward the window. Through the rain-streaked glass I saw the Blackwell Inn's neon sign flicker brightly against the stormy sky. Vacancy. Below it, in smaller letters I hadn't noticed before, a new line pulsed with the same green glow as the key. Registry. Open. I knew, with a calm deeper than the water, that someone else was driving in the rain right now. Someone carrying a silence of their own, someone the key was already waiting for. I closed my eyes. The water whispered Lily's name. It whispered mine. And in the perfect listening silence of the deep, I finally answered. The key grew warmer. The registry turned a new page. The vacancy light buzzed on, eternally patient, waiting for the next set of headlights to cut through the storm. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. I took a job in an old library and noticed the books kept rearranging themselves into sentences I'd whispered in my sleep. The pay was barely above minimum wage, but the Aldridge Athenaeum offered something rarer than money. Silence. Not the absence of sound, but the deep, resonant quiet of centuries-old paper and polished oak. After 2 years of fruitless job hunting with my useless folklore degree, the part-time archiving position felt like sanctuary. Mr. Finch, the head librarian, hired me on the spot. He was a gaunt man in his 70s, with watery eyes magnified by thick glasses and hands that trembled slightly as he showed me the ropes. The Aldridge, he'd said, his voice a dry rustle like pages turning in an empty room, is not merely a repository of books, Miss Vance. It is a living organism. Treat it with respect, and it will treat you kindly. He hadn't elaborated, just handed me a worn leather ledger and a cart of misshelved volumes, his gaze lingering on me a fraction too long before he retreated into his glass-walled office. The building itself was a relic. Built in 1893 by a reclusive industrialist named Silas Thorne, it squatted on the edge of the university district like a brooding stone gargoyle. Stained glass windows depicting forgotten scholars cast fractured rainbows on dusty floorboards. The air perpetually smelled of aged paper, lemon oil, and the faint metallic tang of the old radiator pipes that groaned and hissed like sleeping serpents. My duties were simple: reshelve returned books, assist patrons, though they were few and far between, and slowly, painstakingly reorganize the chaotic Special Collections Annex, a dim, cavernous room in the basement filled with uncatalogued donations, crumbling manuscripts, and books bound in leather that felt disturbingly like skin. The first week was uneventful. I catalogued moldy ledgers, wiped grime from gilt titles, and learned the library's peculiar rhythms. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed not on the hour, but seemingly at random intervals, its bong echoing through the stacks like a funeral knell. The fluorescent lights in the west wing flickered persistently, casting jumping shadows that made the marble busts of long-dead benefactors seem to leer. I chalked it up to the building's age. Old places have quirks. It started subtly on a Tuesday. I'd had a restless night, haunted by dreams of my childhood home, the creak of the third stair, the smell of damp wool from my father's coat. I'd woken, gasping, whispering a phrase my therapist had drilled into me during my anxiety phase. It's not real. It's just the house settling. The words had escaped my lips before I could clamp my mouth shut. That afternoon, reshelving philosophy texts in the third-floor stacks, I froze. On the shelf labeled Ethics, 1700-1750, 3 books stood out like sore thumbs, not by placement, but by title. They formed a sentence perfectly, horrifyingly. It's not real. It's just the house settling. Hardcover bindings, a dusty green volume of Hume's treatise, a cracked spine on Locke's essay concerning human understanding, and a pristine, gold-embossed copy of Berkeley's Principles of Human Knowledge. They weren't part of this section. Hume and Locke belonged 2 shelves down. Berkeley was in metaphysics. But there they were, side by side, their spines forming the exact words I'd whispered into my pillow at 3:17 a.m. My blood turned to ice water. I scanned the empty aisle. No one, just the dust motes dancing in a shaft of weak afternoon light. A trick of the mind, I told myself. Stress, lack of sleep. I reshelved the books correctly, my fingers numb, and forced myself to focus on the Dewey Decimal numbers. That night, I slept with the light on. The second incident happened 3 days later. I'd been arguing with my landlord over the phone about a leak, my voice tight with frustration. Later, half asleep, I'd mumbled into my pillow, "This place is falling apart around me." Just venting, just words lost to the dark. The next morning, in the Special Collections Annex, I was sorting through a box of uncatalogued donations, mostly worthless pamphlets and mildewed ledgers. I pulled out a heavy cloth-bound volume titled Municipal Infrastructure Reports, 1880-1889. Oh, it felt wrong in my hands. Too light. I opened it. The pages were blank. Every single one, except for the very last page, scrawled across it in faded, spidery ink that looked decades old, was the phrase, "This place is falling apart around me." I dropped the book like it was burning hot. It landed with a soft thud on the mildewed carpet. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't stress. This wasn't coincidence. The words were mine, whispered in the dead of night, in the privacy of my own rented room miles away. How? How? I spent lunch hour in the university archives, digging into the Aldridge's history. Silas Thorne, eccentric, wealthy, built the library as a monument to his wife Lavinia, a noted scholar of obscure folklore who vanished under mysterious circumstances in 1891, 2 years before the library opened. Local newspapers were coy, citing delicate health and a prolonged European convalescence. But buried in a society column was a chilling detail. Lavinia Thorne was rumored to have suffered from severe somniloquy, violent sleep-talking, and had been collecting local superstitions about voice thieves and dream eaters in the months before her disappearance. Silas Thorne had donated his entire personal collection, including Lavinia's unpublished research, to found the Athenaeum. The library was her tomb. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of my apartment building, every sigh of the wind, felt like an intrusion. I lay rigid in the dark, consciously sealing my lips, focusing on my breathing, terrified of what might slip out. But exhaustion won. I dreamed of Lavinia Thorne, not as she appeared in the single stern portrait hanging in the main hall, but as a wisp of shadow in the library stacks, her mouth moving silently, hungrily. I woke with a gasp, my own voice echoing in my ears, raw and unfamiliar. I can feel her watching me from the shelves. Dread settled in my stomach like a stone. I called in sick. I couldn't face the library. But by noon, the silence of my apartment became unbearable. The shadows in the corners seemed to deepen. Listening, I needed to see it, to prove it was just my unraveling mind. I drove back to the Aldridge, parking my car hastily on the street. The library was unnaturally quiet. No Mr. Finch in his office, no patrons. The only sound was the erratic tick-tick-tick of the grandfather clock, slower than usual, each tick stretching into a sigh. I went straight to the main fiction section, heart pounding. I found them on the Gothic romance, 1800, 1850 shelf. 3 books. The Monk by Lewis, Melmoth the Wanderer by Maturin, The Italian by Radcliffe. Their spines formed the sentence, "I can feel her watching me from the shelves." The words were clear, undeniable. And Radcliffe's book was upside down, its pages splayed open slightly, as if it had been placed that way deliberately. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. I backed away, bumping into a book cart. It rattled loudly in the silence. From the direction of the Special Collections Annex, deep in the basement, came a sound. Not a groan of pipes, not the flicker of lights. A soft, rhythmic thumping, like a fist slowly, patiently, tapping against wood from inside a closed cabinet. Thump, thump, thump. I ran, not towards the exit, but towards Mr. Finch's office. I needed answers. I needed to know what I'd walked into. I yanked open his office door without knocking. He was sitting at his desk, but not working. He was staring out the window at the gray afternoon sky, his face ashen. On his desk lay an open ledger, not the one he'd given me, but an ancient, leather-bound volume with tarnished brass corners. Its pages were filled not with catalog numbers, but with cramped, frantic handwriting. Phrases, sentences, dozens of them, scrawled in different inks, some faded brown, some startlingly fresh and black. Make it stop singing in the walls? The baby won't stop crying, and it's not mine. I left the oven on. I know I did. She's under the floorboards. She's always been under the floorboards. And at the very bottom of the last filled page, in a shaky hand that matched Mr. Finch's tremor, but was far more desperate. It takes the whispers. It hungers for the words we lose in sleep. Lavinia's ghost isn't lost. She's the hunger. The library is her mouth. Mr. Finch didn't turn. His voice was a broken whisper, thick with tears he wouldn't shed. You felt it too, didn't you? The words you shouldn't have spoken, appearing where they don't belong. He finally looked at me, his magnified eyes wide with a fear that had long since curdled into resignation. Silas Thorne didn't build this place for his wife. He built it around her, to contain her. Lavinia, she wasn't just a scholar. She believed in the old things, the things that feed on unguarded thoughts, on the raw, unfiltered words we spill when our minds are unguarded. She tried to bind one, or perhaps it bound her. When she vanished, Silas knew. He walled up her study in the basement, the room that's now Special Collections, and poured his fortune into stone and silence, hoping to starve it. But stone doesn't silence hunger. It only makes it patient. He tapped the ledger with a trembling finger. This is the record. Every night watchman, every cleaner, every stray patron who muttered in their sleep near the stacks, their whispers, their fears, their secrets, Lavinia's echo takes them. It rearranges the library's bones to speak them back, to feed the thing that wears her name. It's been starving, decades of silence, until you came. He looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time. You talk in your sleep, Miss Vance, loudly, clearly, and you carry such vivid fears. The house settling, falling apart, being watched. It's banquets for it. A crash echoed from the basement annex. Not a thump, a crash. Like shelves collapsing. Mr. Finch flinched, his face crumbling. It knows you're here. It knows you know. It wants the rest of your words, the deep ones, the ones you whisper about your sister. My breath stopped. Clara, my little sister, who drowned in Miller's Pond when I was 10. The guilt that had lived in my bones for 20 years. The words I choked back every single night. The ones that sometimes escaped in ragged, tear-filled whispers. I should have been watching her. It was my turn. Another crash, closer, from the stairs leading up from the basement. The rhythmic thumping was gone, replaced by a wet, tearing sound like leather splitting apart. Books were falling, thudding onto the stone floor below. Mr. Finch stood up, his chair scraping harshly. "There's a way," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the growing chaos below. "Lavinia's original research, her journal, it's not in the catalog. Silas hid it, within the hunger, in the very heart of special collections. A small blue book, vellum pages. If you can find it before it finds you, it might tell you how to starve it again, how to silence it." He grabbed a heavy brass letter opener from his desk, his knuckles white. "I'll hold it off. Go, now, down the left corridor, third door on the right. The real special collection." He moved past me, towards the archway leading to the basement stairs, his frail body suddenly rigid with a terrible resolve. "Remember the words, Alara," he called back, his voice cracking. "Remember what you whisper. Don't give it those words." I didn't hesitate. I ran. Down the dim main hall, past the staring busts, past the grandfather clock which now chimed a single, discordant bong as I passed. The left corridor was darker, narrower, the air thick with dust and the smell of dry rot. The third door on the right was unmarked, made of heavy scarred oak. It was slightly ajar. From within came the tearing sound, louder now, mixed with a new sound, a dry, papery rustling like 1,000 pages being frantically turned at once, and beneath it a whisper, not one voice, but dozens, layered over each other, rising and falling like a sickening chorus. Watching from the shelves, falling apart. Not real, not real, not real. Oh, should have been watching. My sister's name, my guilt. It was hunting for it. I pushed the door open. Special Collections wasn't just a room, it was a cavern. Floor-to-ceiling shelves stretched into gloom, crammed with books, scrolls, wooden boxes. But they were in chaos. Shelves had been violently wrenched open. Books lay scattered like fallen soldiers, pages splayed open. Dust hung thick in the beams of weak light filtering through high, grimy windows. The air vibrated with that dry, tearing rustle. And in the center of the room, hovering 3 feet off the ground, was a swirling vortex of pages. Torn leaves from hundreds of books spiraled around a core of deeper shadow, forming shifting, fragmented sentences that dissolved as quickly as they formed. Clara is cold. The water was so dark. My fault, my fault, my fault. It was feeding. It was trying to form the sentence it craved most. I dropped to my knees, scrambling through the debris on the floor, ignoring the dust choking me, the way the torn pages seemed to writhe under my fingers. Blue book, vellum pages, Lavinia's journal. My eyes darted over spines, over broken bindings. Nothing. The whispering chorus grew louder, more insistent. The vortex pulsed, the shadow at its heart, deepening, stretching towards me like a grasping hand made of ink and dust. The temperature plummeted, my breath fogged in the air. "Ilara!" The chorus hissed, weaving my name into the fragments. "Ilara, you were supposed to watch." Tears blurred my vision. I kicked aside a pile of mildewed pamphlets, and there it was, tucked beneath a shattered globe stand, a small, unassuming book bound in faded blue cloth, its edges soft with age. Vellum pages peeked from within. Lavinia's journal. I grabbed it just as the vortex surged. The swirling pages shot towards me like a flock of angry birds, enveloping my arms, my legs, clinging with unnatural stickiness. The whispering became a roar inside my skull, drowning out thought, hammering the terrible true sentence it wanted to complete. I should have been watching Clay. I wrenched the journal open with my free hand. The pages were brittle, covered in Lavinia's elegant looping script. I flipped frantically past sketches of strange sigils, past notes on dream parasites, and the consumption of unspoken grief. The pages stuck together. The whispering intensified, the pages binding my wrists like restraints. Cold seeped into my bones. I saw Clara's face in the swirling shadow, pale, waterlogged, her eyes wide and accusing. "Rah!" The chorus screamed, completing the name. I should have been watching Clara. The words ripped from my throat before I could stop them. A raw, sobbing confession torn from 20 years of buried pain. The vortex shrieked. A sound like tearing parchment amplified 1,000-fold. The pages binding me tightened, cutting off circulation. The shadow lunged, a gaping maw of darkness forming within the vortex, reaching for my face, for my mouth, to devour the source of the words. My eyes landed on a passage in the journal, a single underlined phrase written in frantic, jagged letters that looked nothing like Lavinia's usual hand, as if written in terror. 2. Starve the hunger, speak the truth you bury not in darkness, but in light, not the whispered guilt. The truth, the real truth. With a gasp that tore my throat, I wrenched my head back from the shadow maw and screamed the words not in a whisper, but in a ragged, defiant shout that echoed off the stone walls of the annex, shattering the whispering chorus. I was scared. I was 10 years old, and I was scared to go in the water after what happened to Benny Miller. It wasn't just my turn, it was my fear. Clara knew I was scared. She waved at me from the dock and smiled, and I smiled back, and then she slipped and I froze. I froze. That's the truth. That's what I bury. The vortex shattered. The pages fell like dead leaves, fluttering silently to the dusty floor. The shadow dissolved into wisps of smoke that vanished before they touched the ground. The cold receded, replaced by the familiar damp chill of the basement. The whispering was gone. Utter silence descended, broken only by my ragged sobs and the distant normal tick-tick-tick of the grandfather clock filtering down from above. I lay on the cold stone floor, surrounded by scattered books and torn pages. Lavinia's blue journal clutched to my chest like a shield. The air smelled only of dust and old paper. No decay, no hunger. I don't know how long I lay there. Eventually, I heard Mr. Finch's slow, shuffling footsteps approaching the annex door. He paused in the doorway, leaning heavily on the brass letter opener, his face pale but calm. He took in the chaos, the scattered pages, me trembling on the floor. He didn't speak. He just nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. He understood. I still work at the Aldrich. The pay is still terrible. But the silence now is different. It's not the silence of waiting hunger. It's the quiet of a deep, old wound finally scabbed over. I reshelve books. I help the rare patron. I never whisper in my sleep anymore. I speak my fears aloud to friends, to my therapist, to the empty air of my apartment when the shadows grow long, out loud in the light. But sometimes, on the quietest afternoons when the dust motes dance in the stained glass light, I'll be reshelving in a forgotten corner. I'll pull a book from a high shelf, and for just a second the spine won't match its neighbors. The title will be wrong, and if I look closely, in the grain of the old leather binding, I might see the faintest impression of letters, like words pressed deep into the material by an invisible hand. She knows. I close the book. I reshelve it correctly. I take a deep breath of the lemon oil and paper air, and I walk away, speaking softly to myself, my voice clear and steady in the quiet library, out loud, always out loud, because the silence between the shelves is no longer empty. It's listening, and it remembers the taste of words. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. My childhood home wasn't empty when we returned after 20 years. The key still fit. That was the first warning I should have heeded. The brass house key, tarnished green at the teeth, warm from my pocket, sliding into the front door lock with the same smooth half-turn resistance it had in 1998. No rust seizure, no warped wood jamming the frame, just a soft click, like the house had been waiting, like it had kept the door unlocked. "Huh?" I said, pulling the door open. Dust motes swirled in the late afternoon sun, slicing through the storm door's cracked upper pane. The same crack, I realized, from when I'd thrown a baseball at 12 and missed the glove my dad held out for practice. Still turns. My sister Lena stood behind me, arms crossed over her chest, sunglasses pushed up into her dark hair. She didn't step forward. "Smells off," she murmured. It did. Not the expected reek of mildew, rodent decay, or stagnant air. Instead, wax, lemon oil, and, underneath it, faint but undeniable, vanilla. Her vanilla. Mom's favorite candle scent. The one she burned every Sunday while grading papers at the kitchen table. "Impossible," I said, forcing a laugh. "Place has been vacant since the bank took it. 20 years, Lena. Pipes must have frozen and cracked. Maybe mold's mimicking." I stepped inside. The parlor was clean. Not pristine, not restored, but occupied. The floral print sofa, our sofa. The one with the frayed armrest I'd worn smooth with nervous thumb rubbing during thunderstorms, was draped with a crocheted afghan, yellowed but intact. A dusting of fine ash, like from a long burned candle, coated the coffee table's surface, beside a chipped ceramic mug. Inside it, a single, dried-out tea bag, brand Tetley, Mom's only choice. Lena finally entered, her boots clicking on the hardwood, Our hardwood, the one spot near the doorway worn silvery from decades of foot traffic. "Who's been here?" she whispered, voice tight. "No one," I said, but my pulse was hammering against my ribs. Bank records were clear. Sheriff's office confirmed it's been sealed since '04. No squatters, no break-ins. We moved deeper. The kitchen. The Formica countertops gleamed under a layer of fine dust. The stove was cold, but the oven light was on, casting a faint, buttery glow inside its cavity. Empty, spotless. On the fridge, held by a magnet shaped like a red apple. The one I'd won at the county fair in '97. A single sheet of paper. Lena reached for it first. Her hand shook. It wasn't a note. It was a list. Grocery list, in Mom's looping, precise cursive. Milk, eggs, 1 Dawes, bread, vanilla tea, James's crackers, saltines, not Ritz, Lena's apples, Granny Smith. Below it, in smaller script added later in blue ink. And don't forget the cake mix, chocolate for Friday. Friday. Today was Friday. I looked at my watch. 4:17 p.m. James. Lena breathed, her eyes wide behind her glasses now. The basement. We'd both thought it, simultaneously, because the list, the vanilla, the cake mix, it pointed to one thing, one ritual. Every Friday, without fail, Mom baked a cake, chocolate, from a box. "Because," she'd say, wiping flour on her apron, "store-bought cake is a sin, and homemade from scratch is too much trouble on a school night. This is the Goldilocks zone." She'd mix it in the big yellow bowl, humming off-key, and slide it into the oven at exactly 4:30. We'd smell it by 5, rich, warm, promising. The oven light was on, but the oven was cold. "We should go," Lena said, backing toward the hall. "Call the sheriff. This isn't right." But I was already moving toward the basement door. It stood ajar, not closed, not locked, just open 3 inches. Darkness yawned beyond the crack. The smell intensified as I approached. Vanilla, yes, but now layered with something deeper. Baking chocolate. Rich, warm, immediate. "James, don't." I pushed the door wider. The stairs descended into gloom. No light switch at the top. Dad had never fixed the one that shorted out in '96. We'd always used the pull chain halfway down. I reached for it. My fingers brushed cold metal. I pulled. The single bare bulb flickered once, twice, then steadied, casting long, wavering shadows down the steep wooden steps. The concrete floor below was swept clean. The old washer and dryer hulking in the corner were draped with sheets, white cotton, like hospital linen. And in the center of the room, beneath the light, stood the yellow mixing bowl. On the counter beside it, a box of Betty Crocker dark chocolate, torn open, a carton of eggs, a half-empty jug of milk. And standing by the bowl, facing away from me, was a woman. She wore a faded floral apron over a cream-colored sweater I hadn't seen in 20 years. The one with the tiny moth holes near the collar, Mom always pretended not to notice. Her hair, streaked with silver now but still pulled back in the same loose bun, was dusted with flour. She was stirring. Slow, rhythmic strokes of the wooden spoon against the ceramic. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was identical, down to the slight catch where the spoon's edge nicked the bowl's rim, a flaw I'd made at 10 by dropping it on the tile floor. "Mom!" The word escaped me, raw, unbidden. The stirring stopped. She didn't turn, didn't speak, just stood, spoon suspended midair over the bowl. Lena appeared beside me on the stairs, gripping the railing. Her breath hitched. "It's not her," she hissed. "It can't be." But it was. The slope of her shoulders, the way she held her left wrist slightly bent from the arthritis that had started in '99, the tiny scar on her forearm from the bread knife slip in '95. "Mom," I said again, louder, stepping down onto the first stair. "It's us, James and Lena. We're back." Slowly, she turned. Her face was older, gaunt. Deep lines fanned from her eyes and mouth, etched by years we hadn't witnessed. Her skin had a waxy pallor like marble left too long in shade. But her eyes were the same. Warm hazel, flecked with gold, filled with a quiet, aching recognition. "Jamie?" she whispered. Her voice was thinner, frayed at the edges, but unmistakable. "Lena." Lena made a small, wounded sound. You died. Car accident. Route 17, March 12th, 2001. We were at the funeral. We buried you." Mom's gaze didn't waver. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I know, sweetheart. I know what they told you." She set the spoon down gently on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, a gesture so familiar it punched the air from my lungs. "They got it wrong," she said softly, "about the accident, about me." She walked toward us, her slippers whispering on the concrete. She stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking up. "The car went off the road, yes, but I wasn't in it." Lena's voice cracked. "The police report said the driver was alone, female, unidentified due to trauma." Mom's eyes flickered with pain. "They assumed it was me. My license was in the glove compartment. My scarf was on the passenger seat. It made sense to them." She reached out, her fingers brushing the railing near Lena's hand. Lena flinched, but didn't pull away. "I walked," Mom said. "Afterwards, through the woods, for hours. It was raining, cold. I just kept walking, away from the noise, away from the lights." Her voice dropped to a thread. "Something called me. From the old quarry, a sound like wind through reeds. But it had words in it." She looked past us, up the stairs, toward the kitchen light. "It told me to come home, that you'd be back, that you'd need me, that the house remembered." "The house doesn't remember anything," I said, but my certainty was crumbling, because the vanilla smell was stronger now, thick as syrup, because the chocolate batter in the bowl looked fresh, glistening, dark, flecked with bubbles from vigorous mixing, because the oven light was on and the oven was still cold. "It does," Mom murmured. "Houses hold on to things, emotions, echoes, love." She looked at me, her eyes suddenly sharp, piercing. "Fear!" She turned back to the counter, picked up the spoon. "The cake needs to go in. It's almost 4:30. She moved to the oven, opened it. The light inside blazed, illuminating empty racks. "Mom, wait," I said, descending another step. "How did you survive? Where did you go for 20 years? She didn't look at me as she poured the batter into the greased pan. Her movements were precise, economical, the same way she'd done it 1,000 times. "I came here," she said simply. "Every day I cleaned, I aired the rooms, I bought the groceries, I waited." "For us?" Lena asked, her voice trembling. "For Friday," Mom corrected gently. She slid the pan into the oven, closed the door, and turned the dial. The familiar click hiss of the gas igniting sounded, except there was no flame visible through the oven window. Just darkness and the persistent, unwavering glow of the interior light. "You always came home for cake, remember? Even when you were angry. Even when you thought you hated me. You'd sit at the table and the smell would bring you back." She turned, wiping her hands again, her smile widening. It didn't reach her eyes. They remained deep, still pools of something ancient and waiting. "The house missed you," she said. "It got lonely after they took you away." Took us away. After the funeral, Aunt Carol had moved us to Ohio, sold everything, told us it was for our own good, a fresh start. "Mom," I said, my throat tight, "we need to talk about what happened, about the voice in the quarry." She tilted her head, just like she had, the shape in the cemetery years later. A memory slammed into me unbidden, the cold weight on my chest, the layered whispers, the names flooding in. It's not about burying something, it's about giving something, your voice, your attention, your name. "Talking is over," Mom said softly. She took a step toward us, then another. Her slippers made no sound on the concrete. "Listening is what matters now." The basement light flickered. When it steadied, she was closer, too close. I could smell the vanilla on her skin, see the fine network of cracks at the corners of her eyes, not from age, but from something drier, older, like porcelain left too long in the sun. Lena grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "James, look." She was pointing past Mom at the far wall, where the sheets draped over the washer and dryer had shifted, not fallen. Shifted, revealing not machines, but shapes. Two shapes. Silhouettes pressed against the concrete wall, barely visible under the thin cotton. Tall, thin, featureless, standing perfectly still, and as I stared, one of them, the one on the left, tilted its head, slowly, jointlessly, just like she had. The oven timer dinged, a sharp, cheerful burring that echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence. Mom turned, her smile serene. "There it is, right on time." She walked to the oven, opened the door. Warmth billowed out, not the dry heat of baking, but a damp, earthy warmth, like opening a cellar door in late summer. And the smell, the chocolate smell, was gone, replaced by wet soil, by roots, by the faint, sweet decay of fallen leaves. Inside the oven, the cake pan sat on the middle rack, but the cake wasn't brown, it was gray, the color of old concrete. The surface wasn't smooth, it was textured, pitted, like skin. And rising from its center, pressing against the foil liner, was the unmistakable knotted curve of a human knuckle. Mom reached in, not flinching from the heat, and lifted the pan out. She set it on the counter with a soft clink. "Who's first?" she asked, her voice suddenly rich, resonant, layered with whispers, dozens of whispers weaving beneath her own. "James? Lena?" She picked up the knife. The one from the wooden block beside the sink, the long, thin-bladed one Dad used for carving the Thanksgiving turkey. Its edge caught the flickering light as she held it up, and in that light I saw the reflection, not in the blade, in the pan. The gray surface of the cake wasn't just textured, it was moving, ripples passing over it like something beneath was breathing. Mom brought the knife down, not on the cake, on the counter beside it. Thwack! The blade sank deep into the wood. She left it there, quivering. Then she looked at me, her eyes now completely black. No whites, no iris, just endless, depthless obsidian. "The house is hungry, Jamie," she whispered, the chorus of voices swelling, filling the basement, vibrating in my teeth, my bones, my blood. "It's been so long." She took a step forward. Her hand, cold as riverstone, closed around my wrist, and the oven light, the steady, buttery glow, snuffed out. Darkness flooded the basement, but I could still see her. See them. The two shapes by the wall had stepped free of the sheets. They stood behind her now, tall, thin, waiting, and as Mom leaned in, her breath smelling of vanilla and damp earth, her lips brushing my ear, I heard it again. The sound from the quarry, from the cemetery, from the space behind my own eyes. A sound like wind through reeds, but with words in it. And this time I understood them. Welcome home. Stay, we've saved you a slice. That brings this story to a close. Let's carry on to the next one. I was hired to watch an empty mansion, but every mirror shows a crowd. The job posting was absurdly specific, absurdly lucrative. Security monitor required, historic residence, isolated location, 14-day assignment, $3,500 flat fee, duties, nightly patrols, 22 Gal 06 Del Zaro, logbook entries, perimeter checks, no interaction with structure or contents, strictly observation only. Applicant must be comfortable with solitude, silence, and absolute adherence to protocol. Background check required. Inquiries to custos@viridianstate.com. $3,500 for 2 weeks of walking around a big empty house. It sounded like a scam or a setup. But the background check was real, thorough, invasive, conducted by a firm with impeccable credentials. And the money. My student loans were a suffocating weight, and my temp job barely covered ramen. Desperation again overruled prudence. The email came 3 days later. Congratulations, Mr. Ellis. Your application for the Viridian estate. Assignment has been accepted. Report to the property at 18 hours on June 12th. Keys and instructions will be provided. Remember, observation only. Do not touch. Do not enter rooms unnecessarily. Do not engage. Your safety depends on compliance. The Viridian estate wasn't on any map I could find. Directions led me down a series of narrowing county roads, finally onto a gravel track choked by pines. After 20 minutes of bouncing over potholes, the trees fell away. It wasn't a mansion. It was a citadel. 3 stories of pale gray stone, stark and severe, with narrow dark windows like watchful eyes. No turrets, no ornate carvings, just clean, brutal lines, more fortress than home. It sat on a bare granite outcrop, surrounded by nothing but wind-rustled grass and distant hazy mountains. A high wrought iron fence, topped with sharp spikes, encircled the property. The gate stood open, a silent invitation, or a trap sprung. A man waited on the steps. Late 50s, sharp suit, thinning silver hair, eyes like chips of flint behind wire-rimmed glasses. He held a small black case. "Mr. Ellis, Mr. Thorne." His handshake was brief, dry, and conveyed zero warmth. Punctual, good. He didn't smile. "The terms are non-negotiable. You observe, you patrol, you log, you leave the interior untouched. Violate this and the contract is void. Payment forfeit. Immediate ejection." He opened the case. Inside lay a heavy, old-fashioned key on a brass fob, a thick, leather-bound logbook, and a sleek, modern digital voice recorder. The key accesses the ground floor only, the kitchen, the main hall, the service corridor. The upper floors and west wing are off-limits. The logbook is for handwritten entries, time, weather, observations. The recorder is for supplementary audio notes. Only if you witness something anomalous. Use it sparingly. Report only what you see, not what you think, not what you fear. He handed me the case. "Your shift begins at 22 for an hour. You have 4 hours to settle in, familiarize yourself with the permitted areas. Do not wander, do not explore. Dinner is in the kitchen icebox. basic provisions. You'll find a cot there." He turned to leave, then paused. "One final thing, Mr. Ellis. A peculiarity of the Viridian estate, the house, reflects. Be mindful of what you see in the glass. It is not always accurate. Focus on the physical reality. Ignore the reflections." He walked down the steps, got into a black sedan that hadn't been there a moment before, and drove away, leaving me alone on the granite steps, the massive oak door looming before me. The key turned smoothly. The door opened soundlessly. Inside, the air was still and cold, smelling of stone dust and old paper. The main hall was vast, empty, except for a single scarred wooden table holding a kerosene lantern. No furniture, no art, just bare stone walls, bare floorboards, and towering narrow windows draped in heavy, dust-sheeted curtains. Directly opposite the entrance, a grand staircase swept up into shadow. To the left, an archway led to the kitchen, a functional, stainless steel space with a cot folded in the corner, an icebox humming softly, and shelves stocked with canned goods and bottled water. To the right, a corridor, the service corridor, Thorne had called it, led deeper into the house's belly. I dropped my duffel on the cot. Thorne's warning echoed. Ignore the reflections. I scanned the hall. There were mirrors, not ornate, gilded affairs, but large, functional plates of glass set into the stone walls at intervals. Likely for security to see around corners in the old days. They were dusty, tarnished at the edges. I approached the first one. It showed the empty hall behind me, my own reflection, pale, wary, duffel bag slung over my shoulder. Normal. I moved to the next. Same thing. Hall, me, dust, relief, thin and fragile, washed over me. Peculiarity, old glass, distortion. Thorne was just being dramatic or testing me. I ate a cold can of stew, the silence pressing in. 21:45, time to prep. I filled a lantern, checked the flashlight Thorne had included in the case. I opened the logbook. Thick, creamy paper. On the first page, in precise angular script, assignment, security observation, Viridian Estate, observer, A. Ellis, dates, June 12th, 25. Protocol, observe, log, do not engage. Below it, blank lines for entries. 22, car. I lit the lantern. Its warm, flickering light pushed back the gloom, casting long, dancing shadows. I stepped into the main hall. First patrol, perimeter check. Thorne had stressed it. Walk the fence line inside the property. Confirm all gates, just the one main entrance, are secure. Easy. I opened a heavy front door and stepped out. The wind was stronger outside, carrying the scent of pine and cold earth. The fence stretched away, iron black against the twilight. I walked clockwise, my boots crunching on the gravel drive. The house loomed at my back, its windows dark, watchful. I reached the far corner, turned, and stopped. In the large window of what I assumed was the library, ground floor, west side, the interior light from my lantern, held low, cast a reflection onto the glass. It wasn't just my reflection, dozens of them. A crowd, men and women in dark, old-fashioned clothing, suits, long skirts, hats, packed tightly together, their faces turned towards me, towards the window. They weren't moving, just standing, watching. Their expressions were indistinct in the low light, blurred by the glass, but the sheer number of them pressed shoulder to shoulder in a room I knew was empty sent a jolt of pure ice down my spine. I stumbled back, heart hammering. Trick of the light, refraction, my own distorted shadow multiplied. I raised the lantern higher. The crowd remained, dense, silent, watching. I forced myself to walk closer, peering past my own reflection. Inside the window, beyond the glass, it was empty, just bare floorboards, bare walls. Dust motes danced in my lantern beam. The physical reality was void. The reflection was teeming. Ignore the reflections. Thorne's voice, calm, certain. I tore my eyes away, finished the perimeter check with shaken hand, and practically ran back inside, slamming the heavy door shut. 22:15. Logbook entry. 22:15. Perimeter check complete, fence secure, main gate latched, observed reflection anomaly in west-facing ground floor window, library. Multiple figures visible in reflection. Interior confirmed empty upon direct observation. Protocol followed. No engagement. My hand trembled as I wrote. Reflection anomaly. Clinical. Safe. I moved into the main hall for the interior patrol. Stick to the center. Observe the mirrors. I passed the first mirror. My reflection. Alone. Good. The second mirror. My reflection. And a blur of movement behind my left shoulder. A dark shape. Tall. Indistinct. Gone before I could focus. I stopped. Breathed. Peripheral vision. Shadow from the lantern. I walked slowly to the third mirror, the large one at the base of the staircase. I steeled myself, looked. The hall behind me was filled, not dozens, hundreds. A sea of faces, men in stiff collars and dark coats, women in high-necked dresses, hair pinned severely, children in miniature versions of the adults. They stood in perfect silent rows, filling the vast space of the hall, spilling up the first few stairs, pressed against the walls where, in reality, there was only empty stone. They weren't looking at me. They were all looking up. Towards the top of the staircase, their faces were pale, blurred, like figures seen through old, warped glass, but their stance, their utter, unnerving stillness, was chillingly real. In the center of the crowd, near the foot of the stairs, stood a man, taller than the others, wearing a long, dark coat. His face was clearer, gaunt, stern, eyes like deep wells. He wasn't looking up. He was looking directly at my reflection. At me? My blood turned to slush. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The lantern light flickered, making the crowd seem to ripple, to breathe. Then, as if sensing my paralysis, the man in the coat raised his hand. Not a wave, a slow, deliberate gesture, his index finger extended, pointing not at my reflection. Through the mirror. At me. A strangled gasp escaped my lips. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, crashing into the stone wall. The lantern clattered to the floor, its light guttering wildly, casting frantic, leaping shadows. When the light steadied, I looked back at the mirror. Empty. Just the hall. Just my own terrified face, white as bone, eyes wide with primal fear. I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the lantern. My hands were slick with sweat. Ignore the reflections. Ignore the reflections. Ignore the reflections. 22:30. Logbook entry, the pen digging. Into this paper. 22:30, interior patrol. Mirror 3, stairwell base, exhibited significant reflection anomaly. Dense crowd visualized. Estimated 200-plus figures, all facing staircase. One figure, male, dark coat, appeared to gesture. Interior confirmed empty upon physical verification. Observer momentarily disoriented. Protocol maintained. No engagement. Disoriented. An understatement. I felt hollowed out. Violated. The rest of the patrol was a blur of terror. Every mirror was a potential trap. The one in the service corridor showed me walking alone until I passed it. And in the periphery of the glass, a child's small, pale hand reached out from behind a door that was, in reality, closed and empty beyond. I didn't stop, didn't look back, just walked faster, my boots loud on the boards, the tick, tick, tick of a clock somewhere in the house suddenly deafening. Midnight. I retreated to the kitchen, barricading the door with a chair I knew was useless. I sat on the cot, back against the stainless steel counter, lantern beside me, the logbook open on my knees. My watch read 00:07. Thorne's voice echoed, "Your safety depends on compliance." Compliance meant ignoring the impossible. But how do you ignore a crowd of ghosts pointing at you through glass? I needed proof. Tangible proof, not just my shaky testimony. Thorne had given me the voice recorder for supplementary audio notes, only if you witness something anomalous. Was seeing a silent crowd in a mirror anomalous enough? It felt like the bare minimum of what this house offered. I picked up the recorder, pressed record. My voice, when I spoke, was a dry rasp. Log supplement, June 12th, 0008. Arthur Ellis, stationed in kitchen. Visual confirmation of mass reflection event in main hall mirror 3. Crowd estimated 200 plus. Period clothing silent, all oriented towards upper floors. One individual interacted, gestured, pointed. I took a shaky breath. Physical sweep confirms interior spatial emptiness. Reconciling visual data with physical reality remains challenging. Requesting clarification on nature of reflection peculiarity cited in briefing. Is this expected? Is it harmless? Advise. I stopped the recording. The silence rushed back in, thicker, heavier. The tick, tick, tick of the clock was gone, replaced by something else, a murmur, faint, distant, like a crowd waiting in another room, a low hum of voices, indistinct, formless, but undeniably they're coming from everywhere, the walls, the floor, the air itself. It grew louder, not angry, not threatening, expectant, like an audience settling into their seats before the curtain rises. My eyes darted to the small round mirror mounted above the sink. I saw my own reflection, pale, sweating, eyes wide, and behind me, reflected in the mirror, filling the small kitchen space that was, in reality, empty, except for me and the cot. The crowd, dozens of them crammed into the tiny space, their blurred faces turned towards my back, silent, waiting. The murmuring swelled, filling my ears, a tidal wave of soundless expectation. I squeezed my eyes shut. Not real, not real, not real. I opened them. The mirror showed only me. The murmuring stopped. 02R, patrol time. I couldn't stay in the kitchen. Protocol demanded it. I stood up, legs trembling, picked up the lantern. My hand hovered over the voice recorder. Don't. Thorne's warning. Use it sparingly. Maybe if I just observed, documented, didn't react. I removed the chair barricade, opened a kitchen door. The main hall was darker. The lantern felt feeble. I walked towards the staircase, forcing my gaze straight ahead, refusing to look at the mirrors on the walls. I reached the base of the stairs. The large mirror was to my left. I didn't look. I focused on the steps. Dark wood, polished, leading up into absolute blackness. Just log it. Move on. I turned to face the hall for the entry, and my eyes, traitorous, slid sideways to the mirror. It wasn't the crowd this time. It was me. My reflection stood at the base of the stairs just as I did, but it wasn't mimicking me. It was looking up the stairs, and it was smiling, a slow, wide, utterly alien smile that stretched far too wide across its face, revealing too many teeth glistening in the lantern light. Its eyes were black pits. It raised its hand, my hand, and pointed, not at me, but up the staircase, into the darkness. Go on, the smile seemed to say. Go see. A whimper escaped my throat. I tore my gaze away, fumbling for the logbook, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the pen. I scribbled, the words jagged. 02/15, mirror, 3, reflection of observer, exhibited autonomous behavior, smiling, gesturing towards upper floors. Physical self remained stationary, no engagement, perimeter check aborted, returning to kitchen. I ran back to the kitchen, slammed the door, rebarricaded it, collapsed onto the cot, pulling my knees to my chest, forehead pressed against them. The rationalizations were gone, shattered. This wasn't reflection. This was invitation or summons. Dawn came, gray and weak, filtering through the high kitchen window. The murmuring was gone. The mirrors, when I dared peek, showed only my exhausted, hollow-eyed reflection. I ate nothing, drank water. My watch read 05:50, almost over, almost safe, 05:55. Final patrol, quick, perfunctory, just the main hall, in and out. I picked up the lantern, took a deep breath, opened the door. The hall was bathed in faint gray light, shadows retreating. Safer. I walked to the center, looked around, empty, stone, wood, dust. I allowed myself to glance at the first mirror, my reflection, tired, relieved. The second mirror, my reflection, and behind it, near the archway to the kitchen, a single figure, the man in the dark coat, standing alone, watching my reflection. His hand was no longer pointing, it was extended, palm up, an offering, an entreaty. My breath hitched. Ignore it. Last patrol. 5 minutes. I turned towards the staircase for the final log note and saw it. On the third step up, a small wooden box, plain, unvarnished, about the size of a shoebox. It hadn't been there before. Impossible. I'd walked past these stairs a dozen times. It was just there. Thorne's voice, cold and final. Do not touch. Do not enter rooms unnecessarily. Do not engage. The box sat there, innocent, waiting. The man in the mirror behind me didn't move. His palm remained upturned. My feet moved, not towards the kitchen, towards the stairs. One step up, the air grew colder. Another step. The smell of stone dust intensified, mixed with something else, old paper, dried flowers, cold earth. I stood on the second step. The box was on the third. I could see the grain of the wood, simple, handmade. The logbook said, do not engage. The contract said, observation only. But Thorne hadn't mentioned boxes appearing on stairs. What was in it? A key to the upper floors? To understanding? A letter? An explanation? A relic? The man in the mirror watched. His dark eyes held no threat, only profound aching sadness and a desperate, silent plea. My hand lifted, not reaching for the box, not yet, reaching for the small round pocket mirror I always carried, a habit from a childhood of checking for spinach in my teeth, a talisman of normalcy. I pulled it out, flipped it open, held it up, angling it to see the box on the step above me. The mirror showed the third step, empty. The box wasn't there. I lowered the pocket mirror, looked up with my own eyes. The box sat on the third step, plain, unvarnished, real. I raised the pocket mirror again, empty step, lowered it, box. The dissonance was a physical blow. Which was real? The physical step or the reflection? Thorne's words, focus on the physical. Reality. The physical reality said the box was there. The reflection said it wasn't. Which truth did I trust? My hand, slick with sweat, lowered a pocket mirror completely. I looked at the box. Then, slowly, deliberately, I reached out. My fingers brushed the rough wood. It was cold, solid. I lifted it. It was lighter than expected, hollow. There was no latch, just a simple, snug-fitting lid. I looked back at the main hall mirror. The man in the dark coat was gone. The hall behind my reflection was empty. Just me on the stairs, holding the box. The murmuring began again, not loud. A soft susurration, like dry leaves skittering on stone, coming from inside the box. I sat down on the second step, the box cradled in my lap. The lantern light flickered. I opened the lid. Inside, nestled in faded blue velvet, lay a single object, a small ornate hand mirror, silver frame, tarnished black. The glass was cloudy, ancient. I picked it up. It was heavier than it looked, cold as grave soil. Hesitantly, I turned it towards my face. The cloudy glass cleared. It didn't show my reflection. It showed the grand staircase behind me. Packed, floored, a vaulted ceiling with the crowd, thousands of them now, silent, still, every face turned towards me, towards the small mirror I held, and in the very center of the throng, on the landing above, stood the man in the dark coat. He wasn't looking at the mirror. He was looking directly at me. Through the glass, through the veil. His lips moved. No sound came from the box. But in the sudden, absolute silence of the hall, in the space behind my own eyes, I heard the words, clear and cold and final as a tomb sealing shut. Witness. The word wasn't a command. It was an absolution, a purpose, a life sentence, I understood. The Viridian estate wasn't haunted by the dead. It was haunted by the unwitnessed, the forgotten, the erased, the lives lived and lost without a single soul to say, I saw you. You were here. They weren't trapped in the house. The house was their monument. And the mirrors, they weren't windows to another world. They were pleas, begging for acknowledgement, begging to be seen, begging for a witness. My job wasn't security. It was ministry. The $30,500 wasn't payment. It was a retainer. I looked down at the small silver mirror in my hand. My reflection was gone. Only the crowd remained, their silent faces a sea of longing. I closed the lid of the box, stood up, walked back down the stairs, not to the kitchen, to the main hall mirror. I stood before it, took a deep breath of the cold, stone-scented air, and looked. The crowd filled the hall, waiting. I met the eyes of the man in the dark coat, and I nodded, a single, solemn dip of my chin. Yes, a sigh seemed to ripple through the reflection, a softening, a release. The man in the coat bowed his head, just slightly. In my pocket, the voice recorder felt heavy. Unnecessary. I wouldn't need it anymore. My logbook entries would change. No more anomaly, no more disoriented. Just 06, Roush, witness, confirmed. I turned from the mirror, the small silver hand mirror warm now in my grasp, and walked towards the kitchen, not to hide, but to prepare. The cot would stay. The canned stew would be eaten. The patrols would continue. But my purpose was clear. I would watch. I would see. I would witness. And every night, when the lantern light flickered on the glass, I would look, not away, but in, and I would count them one by one until they were all seen, until the last forgotten face found its reflection. The crowd would wait, and I, Arthur Ellis, the hired observer, the accidental witness, would stand sentinel in the empty mansion, filled at last with the silent, grateful dead. And this story ends here. The next one begins now. The cemetery caretaker said never read the names out loud. I didn't listen. I rented a cheap room in an abandoned house 3 miles from Blackthorn Cemetery because the rent was $150 a month, and the landlord A wiry, chain-smoking man named Ed barely glanced at my ID before handing over the key. "Just don't go near the cemetery after dusk," he said, his voice low, eyes fixed on the horizon where the trees formed a jagged silhouette against the sinking sun. "And whatever you do, don't read the names out loud, not even once." I laughed it off. Superstition, I figured. Rural folklore. The kind of thing people say to spook city folk who think rural decay is aesthetic. I'd spent the last 6 months chasing abandoned places, derelict asylums in West Virginia, rusted fairgrounds in Ohio, a collapsed coal mine shaft in Pennsylvania. So a decrepit Victorian farmhouse bordering a graveyard felt less like a warning and more like a personal invitation. The house itself was a sagging monstrosity of peeling white clapboard, black shutters hanging crooked like broken teeth, and a wraparound porch whose floorboards groaned underfoot as if in pain. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew, old wood rot, and something faintly sweet, like dried flowers left too long in a sealed jar. There was no electricity, but Ed had rigged a car battery to a couple of LED lanterns in the kitchen and bedroom. Running water came from a hand pump in the yard, its iron handle slick with rust. My room was on the second floor, directly above the parlor, with a single window that faced east, away from the cemetery, Ed had assured me. But the truth is, I could feel it. Even before I saw it, I knew where Blackthorn lay. A quiet pressure in my chest, a faint hum in my ears at night, like distant chanting just below the threshold of hearing. I moved in on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I'd settled into a rhythm. Right during the day, explore the property at dusk. Sleep with the lantern dimmed and the door latched, though the lock was broken and the latch clicked hollowly. More suggestion than barrier. The first odd thing happened on Friday. I was walking the property line near the back fence, which sagged and leaned inward where the posts had rotted, when I saw it. The cemetery, not from the front gate, which was chained and padlocked with a rusted sign that read Blackthorn Memorial. Est. 1842. Private property, no trespassing, but from a gap in the trees where the fence had collapsed entirely. A narrow footpath, overgrown with nettles and wild thyme, led straight through the underbrush and opened onto a sea of tilted headstones, obelisks, and crumbling mausoleums shrouded in ivy. It wasn't large, maybe 3 acres, but it felt dense, like time had pooled there and thickened. The air changed the moment I stepped past the tree line, cooler, heavier, still no birds, no insects, just silence, so complete it pressed against my eardrums. I didn't go in, not yet. I just stood at the edge, hands in my pockets, staring. Most of the stones were slate or granite, worn smooth by rain and decades of neglect. Names had faded, dates blurred into illegible smudges, but some, especially the newer ones, mid-20th century, were still clear. One caught my eye, a small marble marker, unadorned except for a single inscription carved in neat, precise script. Eleanor Voss, beloved sister, 1919, 1937. She listened too closely. I frowned. She listened too closely. An odd epitaph, poetic, unsettling. I crouched, brushing away moss with my thumb. The stone was cold, even through my glove. And then, without thinking, just a reflex, the way you might test a word on your tongue, I whispered it. Eleanor Voss. The air didn't move, but something shifted. A pressure behind my eyes, sudden and sharp, like a migraine spike. I blinked, stood quickly, looked around. Nothing. Just the stones The trees, the slanting afternoon light casting long skeletal shadows across the ground. I walked back to the house, uneasy but dismissive. Coincidence? Stress? Low blood sugar? I made tea on the propane camp stove, wrote 2 pages of my novel, and went to bed by 9. That night, I woke at 2:17 a.m., not to an alarm, not to noise, to stillness, the kind that feels like a held breath. The lantern had dimmed to a faint amber glow. Moonlight bled through the thin curtains, striping the floorboards in pale light. And there, at the foot of my bed, a shape, not a person, not quite. A silhouette, indistinct at first, like smoke given weight. Taller than a man, but thin, too thin, its shoulders hunched forward as if bearing an invisible burden. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood, watching. I didn't scream, couldn't. My throat had sealed shut. My limbs were lead. Only my eyes worked, darting from the shape to the door to the window, back to the shape. Then it tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, too smooth, too jointless. And in that moment, I heard it, not with my ears, but inside my skull, like a voice rising from the base of my spine. "You called." I squeezed my eyes shut. Not real, not real. Sleep paralysis. Hypnagogic hallucination. I'd read about it. Common in isolated environments, stress-induced. I counted backward from 100, forcing my breath steady. When I opened my eyes, the shape was gone. The lantern flickered once, then stabilized. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I walked back to the cemetery. I told myself I needed to understand. That rational inquiry dispelled fear, that I owed it to my craft, to horror writing, to investigate the source of the unease. But the truth? I was drawn, like iron to a magnet, like a tongue to a cracked tooth. This time, I went in. The path through the graves was uneven, sunken in places where coffins had collapsed beneath the soil. Weeds choked the alleys between family plots. Many stones were cracked, some split clean in two by roots or frost heave. Others leaned at drunken angles as if trying to flee. I moved slowly, deliberately, scanning inscriptions. Jonathan H. Pike, 1883 to 1901. Rest in peace. Martha and Thomas Bellwether, together beyond the veil. Infant son of A&E Crow, 1899. Nothing unusual, just the usual melancholy of forgotten lives. Then I saw it again. Eleanor Voss's marker. It hadn't moved, but the moss I'd brushed away the day before was back, thick, velvety green, as if it had regrown overnight, and beside it a fresh patch of disturbed earth. Not a grave, too small, too shallow, just a depression, maybe 6 inches deep and a foot wide, filled with dark, damp soil. No footprints, no tool marks, just an indentation, as though something had pressed itself into the ground and then risen. I knelt, touched the soil, cold, wet, and beneath the scent of loam, something else, metallic, like old pennies, like copper left in vinegar. "You're back." I jerked upright. An old man stood 10 feet away, leaning on a gnarled hickory cane. He wore faded overalls over a flannel shirt, a battered tweed cap pulled low over wire-rimmed glasses. His face was a road map of wrinkles, his eyes pale blue and unnervingly sharp. "The caretaker," I said, rising slowly. "Clarence," he said. His voice was dry, rasping like pages turning in a long-locked book. "I tend Blackthorn, 43 years, come all saints." He didn't offer a hand, didn't smile, just stared at me with the weary patience of a man who'd seen too many fools make the same mistake. "I'm just looking," I said, gesturing vaguely. "Writing a book, local history." He grunted. "History's buried here, best left buried." His gaze flicked to Eleanor Stone. "You read her name." It wasn't a question. I just said it, once, out loud. Clarence's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his boot sinking slightly into the soft earth. "Names have weight, son, especially here, especially hers." "Why? What's so special about—" "Don't," he cut in, sharp as a whip. "Don't say it again. Don't even think it too loudly." He looked around, as if expecting the trees themselves to lean in and listen. "Blackthorn ain't like other places. Ground's thin here, veils worn, and some of the dead, they don't rest. They listen. They wait for voices, for names, for invitation." I almost laughed. Almost. But the raw conviction in his voice, the way his knuckles whitened on the cane, stopped me. "Eleanor Voss," I said quieter this time. Testing. Clarence flinched as if struck. His breath hitched. "God damn it." He raised a trembling hand to his temple. "You've done it now." "Done what?" "She's awake." He turned and walked away, cane tapping unevenly on the flagstone path, without another word. I watched him until he disappeared behind a mausoleum draped in ivy, its iron door hanging open like a slack jaw. I left quickly, but not before I noticed something new on Eleanor's stone. The epitaph had changed. Where it once read, "She listened too closely," the letters had shifted, subtly, imperceptibly to the untrained eye. But I saw it. The L in listened was now a C. The second O in closely was deeper, darker. It now read, "She called too closely." That night, the knocking started, not on the door, on the window. 3 soft taps, pause. 3 more, like someone testing the glass, politely asking to be let in. I lay rigid in bed, blanket pulled to my chin, staring at the window. The curtains were drawn, but moonlight still seeped through the thin fabric, casting the room in the shades of gray and silver. The knocking came again. Tap, 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 tap. Steady, patient. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then a whisper, faint, sibilant, barely audible, over the blood roaring in my ears. "Let me in." Not Eleanor's voice, not any voice I recognized. It was layered, multiple tones overlapping like a chorus of dry leaves skittering across stone. Feminine, but fractured, young, but ancient. I squeezed my eyes shut. Go away. Silence for 10 seconds, 20, then scritch. A fingernail, long, sharp, dragging slowly down the glass. I bolted upright, fumbling for the lantern switch. Light flooded the room. The window was empty. But on the sill, just beneath the latch, 3 parallel scratches marred the paint. Deep, fresh, and smeared with something dark and viscous that caught the light like wet ink. I spent the next day in town buying supplies I didn't need, bottled water, canned soup, extra batteries, just to be away from the house. I avoided the cemetery lane, avoided looking toward the trees. But as I drove back down the dirt road at dusk, headlights cutting through the violet gloom, I saw him, Clarence, standing in the middle of the road, cane planted firmly, face grim. I slowed to a stop. He approached the passenger window, his breath fogging the glass. He didn't speak until I rolled it down. "You hear her yet?" he asked. I swallowed. "Last night. At the window." He nodded, as if confirming a diagnosis. "She's close, getting stronger." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a thread. "You've got one chance. Tonight, midnight. Go to her stone, dig where the earth is soft. Bury something of yours, hair, a fingernail, a drop of blood, without speaking her name. Then walk backward out of the cemetery. Don't look back. Don't stop. If you do it right, she might let you go. And if I don't? His eyes held mine. Then she'll keep calling and calling and calling until you answer. I didn't dig that night. I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not the blood, not the hair, not the silent ritual. It felt like surrender, like admitting the rules were real. Instead, I barred the bedroom door with a chair, taped the window shut, lit 3 lanterns, sat on the bed with my back against the wall, a hunting knife from the kitchen drawer gripped in my sweating palm. Midnight passed. 12:30, 1 hours, silence. Maybe Clarence was wrong. Maybe it was just stress. Maybe thump from the attic. A heavy, wet sound like a sack of meat dropped onto floorboards. Then footsteps, slow, dragging, coming down the stairs. Thump, drag, thump, drag. Stopping outside my door, the doorknob turned. It shouldn't have. The chair was braced hard against it, but the knob rotated anyway, smoothly, deliberately, until it clicked against the latch. A pause. Then a voice so close it felt like lips brushing my ear. "You called me, James?" I hadn't told anyone my name. Not Ed, not Clarence, only my driver's license, and that was in my wallet on the dresser. "Open the door," the voice murmured. "I just want to thank you." I pressed myself into the corner, knife raised, breath ragged. The chair screeched, not from force, from inside the room. It slid backward, inch by inch, as if pulled by invisible hands, until a door swung open with a soft creak. She stood there, Eleanor, not a ghost, not smoke, a body, tall, gaunt, dressed in a tattered white nightgown, yellowed with age, the hem dark with soil. Her hair was long, black, matted with roots and grave mold. Her skin was the color of old parchment, gray stretched tight over sharp bones, but her eyes were wide, dark, wet, and fixed on me with terrifying focus. Her lips parted. "Thank you?" she whispered, and then she stepped inside. The door swung shut behind her. No wind, no draft, just closure. I raised the knife. She didn't flinch. "You don't need that," she said, tilting her head, the same motion as the shape in my room. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to stay." She took another step. The lanterns dimmed, not flickered, dimmed, as if the light itself were being absorbed by her presence. "I've been so lonely," she continued, her voice weaving between sorrow and hunger. "No one visits, no one speaks. The others, they sleep, but I listen, I wait. And when I heard you, your voice, so warm, so alive, I knew you'd understand." "I don't understand anything," I choked out. "You will." She smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "You'll learn to listen, too." She raised a hand, long fingers ending in blackened nails, and reached for my face. I slashed with the knife. It passed through her wrist like smoke. No resistance, no blood. But she flinched. A ripple went through her form like water disturbed. For a split second, her face changed. Mouth stretching too wide, eyes blackening fully, skin cracking like dried clay, and from her throat came a sound, a chorus of screams, layered, overlapping, coming from a dozen throats at once. Then she was still again, sad. "You hurt me," she whispered, and the lanterns went out. Darkness, cold, not the chill of night, but the deep, marrow-freezing cold of earth, 3 feet down. I scrambled backward on the bed, hitting the wall. She was on me before I could scream. Her hands, solid now, icy and strong, gripped my wrists. Her breath smelled of damp soil and iron. Her weight pressed me down, not heavy, but inescapable, like the crush of deep water. "Shh," she breathed into my ear. "Don't fight. It's easier if you don't fight." I thrashed, kicked, twisted, useless. Her mouth opened, not to bite, but to speak, and she began to recite, not words, names, dozens, hundreds, a torrent of them whispered rapidly, urgently, each one punctuated by a shudder in her frame. Abigail Crane, Silas Morrow, Lillian Pike, Jeremiah Crow, Thomas Bellwether, Martha Bellwether, Eleanor Voss. She paused. Her eyes met mine. James Alden. My name, spoken in that same layered choral voice, and something shifted inside me. A door opened, not in the room, in my head. A flood of sound rushed in, whispers, weeping, laughter, chanting, sobbing, all converging, all calling, all hungry. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The noise wasn't external. It was inside, vibrating in my teeth, my bones, my blood. She leaned closer. "Now you hear them too," she whispered. "Now you're one of us." Her mouth pressed against my temple, not a kiss, a seal, and the world went silent, not peaceful. Waiting. I don't know how long I lay there. When I opened my eyes, she was gone. The room was empty. The lanterns were on again, burning steady. The door was closed. The chair was back in place. No scratches on the window, no soil on the sill. I sat up. My hands trembled. I reached for the water bottle on the nightstand. Stopped. My reflection in the glass wasn't mine. For just a second, just a flicker, the face staring back was hers. Pale, hungry, smiling. I dropped the bottle. It rolled under the bed. I didn't pick it up. I spent the next 3 days in the house, not sleeping, barely eating, jumping at every creak, every sigh of wind. But nothing happened. No knocks, no whispers, no shapes in the corner. Maybe it was over. Maybe she'd taken what she wanted and left. On the 4th night, I dreamed, not a nightmare, a memory, not mine, hers. I stood in a small white-walled room, 1930s wallpaper peeling at the seams, a narrow bed, a porcelain basin on a stand. A girl, 16 or 17, sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap. Eleanor. She was listening, not to music, not to voices, to the silence between heartbeats, to the hum of the earth, to the voices in the walls. Her mother called from downstairs. "Eleanor, supper's ready." She didn't answer. She couldn't, because she'd heard it. The name, spoken by a neighbor at the fence, just loud enough to carry on the wind. Martha Bellwether passed last night, buried at Blackthorn at dawn. And Eleanor had whispered it back just once. Martha Bellwether. That night, Martha came to her window, not angry, grateful. "You heard me," she'd said, and she'd taken Eleanor's hand and led her into the dark. The dream ended with Eleanor standing at her own grave, freshly dug, watching her family lower the casket, empty, into the ground. She wasn't inside it. She was standing beside it, smiling, free. I woke at 3:33 a.m. The house was quiet, too quiet, no wind, no owls, no crickets, just listening. I got up, walked to the window, drew back the curtain. The cemetery lay bathed in moonlight, and every single headstone, hundreds of them, was turned to face my house. Not tilted, rotated, as if someone had walked among them in the night and turned each one, carefully, deliberately, so their inscriptions faced east, toward me, toward my window, toward my name. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just stood there, hands pressed to the cold glass, and realized the truth. Clarence was wrong. It wasn't about burying something of mine. It was about giving something, my voice, my attention, my name. And I'd already given it. I hear them all now. Not just Eleanor, all of them. Abigail, Silas, Lillian, Jeremiah. They whisper at dusk. They hum in the walls. They wait for me to speak, to acknowledge, so they can step through. Last night, I found a new marker at the edge of the cemetery, freshly placed, granite, polished, no dates, just 2 lines. James Alden. He listened too closely. I haven't touched it, haven't read it aloud, but sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the house holds its breath and the lanterns dim on their own, I catch myself moving my lips, forming the words, and I wonder, when I finally say them out loud, will I join them? Or will they finally come here to stay? With that, the story is over. Let's move to the next story. The babysitter I hired doesn't exist, but she still sends me pictures. It began with a lie, though at the time I thought it was a lifeline. The lie was a website called sittersafe.com with its calming blue and white color scheme, its stock photos of happy, racially diverse families, and its promise of peace of mind for working parents. I was the target demographic, distilled to my purest, most desperate form. A single father, recently widowed, working a job that demanded more of me than I had to give. My daughter Maya was 6 years old, a tiny, fierce creature with her mother's wide, curious eyes and a spirit that deserved more than a tired, grieving father fumbling his way through each day. Her name on the website was Clara Bell. Her profile was a masterpiece of curated trustworthiness. The photo showed a young woman in her mid-20s with a kind, open face, a sprinkle of freckles across her nose, and warm, intelligent eyes. She was wearing a sensible cardigan. Her bio was pitch perfect, a child development major, certified in CPR and first aid, with a passion for creative play and a list of glowing 5-star reviews that seemed almost too good to be true. Clara was a gift, one review gushed. Our little Alfie is usually so shy, but he took to her immediately. Professional, punctual, and so wonderful with our kids. Another read, she even tidied the kitchen, a true gem. I did my due diligence. I paid the extra fee for the premium background check, which came back spotless. We had a video call, and she was just as she appeared in her photo, charming, articulate, and genuinely interested in Maya's love for dinosaurs and sparkly glue. She asked all the right questions. I felt the tight, persistent knot of anxiety in my chest loosen for the first time in months. I hired her for the following Friday night. I had a crucial dinner meeting with a client I couldn't miss. It was the first time I would be leaving Maya with someone other than her grandmother since Sarah had passed. That Friday, she arrived exactly on time. In person, she was even more disarmingly normal. She had a gentle voice and a calm, centered presence that immediately put Maya at ease. She'd brought a tote bag with a new coloring book and a set of crayons that had a glittery sheen. When I left, Maya was sitting at the kitchen table with her, chattering away, already fully under her spell. I drove to my meeting, feeling a profound, almost dizzying sense of relief. The first picture arrived at 7:45 p.m. It was a photo of Maya holding up a drawing of a lopsided purple T-Rex. She was beaming, a gap-toothed smile of pure, unadulterated joy. The caption read, "The fearsome Mayasaurus having a great time. More pictures followed throughout the evening. A shot of Maya in her pajamas, listening intently as Clara read a storybook. A blurry action shot of them building a pillow fort in the living room. Each photo was a little balm to my worried soul, a digital reassurance that I had made the right choice, that my daughter was safe and happy. The last picture came at 9:30 p.m. It was a photo of Maya fast asleep in her bed, her favorite stuffed sloth, Mr. Higgins, tucked under her arm. The soft glow of her rocket ship nightlight cast a warm, peaceful aura over the scene. Safe and sound. Good night from us. When I got home around 11, the house was silent and immaculate. The pillow fort was gone, the toys were back in their chest, and the kitchen was cleaner than I'd left it. I crept into Maya's room and saw the exact scene from the photograph. A perfect tableau of sleeping innocence. I felt a surge of gratitude so powerful it almost brought me to tears. Clara became our regular babysitter. Every week or two I'd book her, and every time it was the same flawless experience. And the pictures became our ritual. They were my window into their evenings, a steady stream of happy, reassuring moments. They were proof that I wasn't failing my daughter, that even in my absence, her life could be filled with fun and care. The first discordant note, the first tiny crack in the perfect facade, occurred about 2 months in. It was a Tuesday night. I was working from home, trying to meet a deadline. Maya was asleep upstairs. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a picture message from Clara's number. I opened it. It was a photo of Maya, asleep in her bed, clutching Mr. Higgins, bathed in the glow of her nightlight. It was an almost identical replica of the picture she sent on her first night. The caption read, "So peaceful when she sleeps." I stared at the photo, a cold, confusing prickle of unease running down my spine. It was a Tuesday. Clara wasn't here. She wasn't scheduled to be. I was the only other person in the house. I checked the timestamp. The photo had been sent just seconds ago. My first instinct was rationalization. It must be a glitch, a delayed message from her last visit. But the caption felt immediate. I stood up, my heart starting to beat a little faster. I walked quietly up the stairs, my every sense on high alert. The house was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I pushed open Maya's door. She was there, in her bed, exactly as she was in the photo, fast asleep. I backed out of the room, my skin crawling. I texted Clara back. "Strange question, but did you just send me a photo?" The reply was instantaneous. "Yes, just thinking about what a sweet girl she is. Hope you both are having a good week." It was a plausible, if slightly odd, explanation. Maybe she was looking through old photos on her phone and sent one by mistake, then tried to play it off. It was weird, but not impossible. I tried to dismiss it, but the image of that photo, sent from outside my house, depicting a real-time event happening within it, was a splinter in my mind that I couldn't quite remove. The following week, I needed to book her again. I logged on to sittersafe.com and searched for her. Profile, nothing. I tried different search parameters. Still nothing. A profile not found error message appeared on the screen. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I went to our old messages on the site's platform. The conversation thread was there, but when I clicked on her name, the same error message popped up. Her profile had vanished. I pulled out my phone and called her number. A generic, synthesized voice responded, "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." Panic, cold and sharp, began to seep into my veins. This made no sense. I contacted SitterSafe's customer support. I spent 20 minutes on hold listening to a tinny, looping piece of instrumental music that frayed my already raw nerves. Finally, a bored-sounding man named Kevin answered. I explained the situation, gave him Clara Bell's name. He put me on hold again. When he came back, his voice was different, cautious. "Sir, we've checked our records. We have no history of a sitter named Clara Bell ever having a profile on our platform." "That's impossible," I said, my voice rising. "I hired her through your site. I have the messages. I paid for a background check." "We have a record of your payments, sir," Kevin said slowly. "But they were for background checks on 3 other potential sitters, all of whom you declined to hire. There's no record of you ever even viewing a profile for a Clara Bell, let alone hiring her." My blood ran cold. I felt the floor drop out from under me. I hung up the phone, my hand trembling. I was in a nightmare. A woman had been in my house. She had been alone with my daughter, and according to the very service that had supposedly vetted her, she didn't exist. My first overwhelming impulse was to protect Maya. I changed every lock in the house. I bought a state-of-the-art security system with cameras covering every entrance, every angle. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilant terror, jumping at every creak of the floorboards, my phone clutched in my hand like a talisman. The pictures stopped. For 3 weeks, there was silence. I started to breathe again. I told myself it was some elaborate, terrifying scam, a phantom hacker who had created a ghost profile to get my credit card information. I told myself the danger had passed. Then the pictures started again. It was a Monday morning. I had just dropped Maya off at school. As I was pulling away from the curb, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. The picture was of Maya on the school playground. She was on the swings, her head thrown back in laughter. It was a beautiful, candid shot, except for the angle. It was taken from high up, as if from the roof of the school, a place no one should have been. And the photo was unnervingly intimate, a stolen moment of pure joy. Beneath it, a single line of text. "She has your laugh." I almost crashed the car. My vision tunneled. My lungs felt like they were collapsing. It wasn't a scam. It wasn't over. Whoever or whatever Clara was, she was still watching us. The pictures became more frequent, more invasive. A photo of me at my desk, taken through the window of my home office. A picture of our grocery cart at the supermarket. The contents, a perfect reflection of our weekly shopping list. A picture of my car parked outside my office. The photographer was everywhere and nowhere. The police were useless. I went to him, my phone in my hand, a wild-eyed, sleep-deprived man trying to explain that he was being stalked by a ghost. They looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion. They took a report, but without a suspect, without a crime beyond sending unsolicited photos, there was nothing they could do. They suggested I block the numbers. I did. She just used new ones. Maya started talking about her. She didn't call her Clara. She called her the picture lady. "The picture lady was watching me play today," she said one evening, pushing her peas around her plate. "What do you mean, sweetie?" I asked, my voice tight. "At the park. She was hiding behind a big tree. She waved at me." What did she look like, Maya? She was blurry, Maya said, frowning, like a picture that's all fuzzy. And she smells like old books, like Mommy's old books in the attic. The attic, my wife's collection of antique photography books. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. The next day, after dropping Maya at her grandmother's, I tore the attic apart. In the back, under a dusty canvas sheet, was a heavy wooden trunk I hadn't opened since Sarah died. It was filled with her prized possessions, old cameras, development equipment, and stacks of antique photographs and glass plate negatives she had bought at estate sales. I spent hours sifting through them, my heart pounding with a nameless dread. I was looking for a face, the kind, freckled face from the CitiSafe profile. I didn't find it, but I found something else. It was a series of family portraits from the late 1800s, all from the same estate. The family was stern-faced and severe, posing stiffly for the camera, and in the background of several of the photos, slightly out of focus, was a young woman in a nanny's uniform. Her features were indistinct, but there was a certain posture, a certain tilt of the head that made my skin crawl. In the final photograph of the series, a picture of two small children playing with wooden hoops. The nanny was in the background, standing by a window, and she was staring directly at this camera. Her face was a pale oval blur, but her eyes were clear, sharp, and filled with a possessive, unsettling intensity. At the bottom of the trunk, I found an old, leather-bound ledger from the estate. It was a record of household staff. My finger traced down the list of names until it stopped. 1888, 1891. Governess, Clara Bell. The entry was followed by a single, spidery notation. Dismissed. Unwholesome attachment to the children. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a stalker. This was something else entirely, something ancient and impossible. A ghost who had imprinted herself onto these photographs, who had lain dormant in my attic for years. Had our grief, our loneliness, somehow woken her up? Had my desperate search for a caregiver on the internet provided her with a new medium, a new way to manifest? The pictures changed. They were no longer just of our present. One morning, I received a photo of me as a child, playing in the front yard of my childhood home. A home that was 1,000 miles away. A home my parents had sold 20 years ago. It was a real photograph, one I recognized from an old family album, but it was altered. Standing in the background, partially obscured by a tree, was the faint, translucent figure of a woman in a long, dark dress. She was inserting herself into my past. She was rewriting my history, weaving her ghostly presence into the very fabric of my life. The final straw came last night. My phone buzzed on my nightstand. I've become conditioned to the sound, reacting to it with a Pavlovian jolt of fear. I knew what it would be, but I was compelled to look. The picture that loaded on my screen was not from the past. It was not of the present. It was of a future I couldn't comprehend. It was a family portrait. I was in it, standing beside an older, grayer version of myself. Maya was there too, a young woman now, with the same sad, vacant expression as the man who was her father. We both looked pale, drained, like faded copies of ourselves, and standing between us, her arms wrapped around both of our shoulders in a gesture of maternal possession, was Clara Bell. Her face was perfectly clear, no longer a blur, no longer a photo on a website. She was solid, real, and she was smiling, A wide, triumphant, terrifying smile. She wasn't just watching us anymore. She was joining us. She was feeding on our lives, our memories, our very vitality. The caption beneath the photo was the most chilling of all. Soon we'll all be together, a perfect family, forever. I'm writing this now because I don't know what else to do. I've packed a bag. Maya and I are leaving. We're going to drive until we run out of road. I'm going to throw my phone into a river. I'm going to get a new one, a new number, a new life. But I know it won't matter. She's not tied to a place, not anymore. She's not just a ghost in the attic or a phantom on the internet. She's attached to us. She's a virus in our lives, and she's been sending me snapshots of our own destruction. I look at my beautiful sleeping daughter, and I know I have to try. I have to run, but I fear, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that no matter where we go, her pictures will follow. And one day, I'll receive that final faded photograph, not as a warning, but as a welcome home. And that's where this story ends. Let's move on to the next one. The portrait above my bed slowly turns its head at night. The rent was suspiciously low, not just a little below market, laughably low. Historic character, the listing had said. Original fixtures, serene solitude. The photos showed a narrow 3-story row house in the oldest part of the city, wedged between buildings that leaned into each other like gossiping neighbors. My new home, or rather, my new cell. After the layoffs, my savings evaporated faster than morning mist, and this was the only thing I could afford that wasn't a converted storage unit or a shared bathroom nightmare in some crumbling flophouse. The owner, a woman named Mrs. Gable, who sounded like she gargled gravel, met me with a set of keys that felt unnaturally cold and heavy. She barely glanced at me, her eyes fixed on the top-floor apartment door. "Third floor's yours. Mind the stairs?" They groaned. "Don't touch the portrait in the bedroom. It's sensitive." She thrust the keys into my hand, turned on her heel, and was gone before I could ask what portrait she meant. The whole interaction lasted less than a minute. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of dust, old paper, and something else, faintly metallic, like dried blood, or perhaps just the rust from the ancient radiators. The apartment itself was cramped, but surprisingly intact. High ceilings, intricate crown molding blackened with age, and windows so grimy the daylight struggled to penetrate. The bedroom, tucked under the eaves at the very top, was the smallest room. It held a narrow bed, a rickety dresser, and one piece of furniture that immediately commanded attention. A tall, ornate wooden wardrobe that seemed to absorb the dim light. But it was the wall above the bed that froze me in the doorway. There, hanging slightly askew on the peeling floral wallpaper, was an oil painting, a portrait. It depicted a woman seated stiffly in a high-backed chair that looked like carved oak. She wore a severe black dress with a high collar that seemed to strangle her neck, buttoned all the way to her chin. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it must have ached, revealing a high, pale forehead and sharp cheekbones. Her eyes were the unsettling part. Large, dark, and painted with an almost photographic realism that made them seem to follow you as you moved. They weren't kind eyes. They were watchful, cold, calculating. A faint, humorless line suggested the ghost of a smile, but it didn't reach those obsidian eyes. She looked displeased, disappointed even. The painting itself was old, the canvas yellowed and cracked like dried mud, the frame heavy and carved with intricate thorny vines that seemed to writhe in the low light. This had to be the sensitive portrait. A shiver, unrelated to the room's chill, traced my spine. I'd sleep here tonight. I'd deal with it tomorrow. The first night was a symphony of unfamiliar sounds. The building settled with deep, groaning sighs. Pipes clanged like ghostly percussion in the walls. Wind whistled through unseen cracks around the window frame. But I was exhausted, physically and mentally drained from the move and the months of job hunting. I fell into a fitful sleep quickly, lulled by the rhythmic creak of the bed frame beneath me. I woke just before dawn, disoriented, my neck stiff from the thin pillow. Gray light filtered through the grimy window. As I blinked away sleep, my gaze drifted upwards, toward the portrait. My breath caught in my throat. It was facing me. Not directly, not head-on, but its angle had changed. When I'd gone to bed, the woman's face had been turned slightly away, her gaze directed towards the window, towards the wall. Now, her head was tilted just a few degrees more towards the center of the room, towards the bed, towards me. Her dark eyes seemed to hold a new intensity in the weak morning light, as if she'd been watching my sleep. My heart hammered against my ribs. Impossible, I told myself. Trick of the light. You were half asleep. The frame must have slipped on the nail. I got up, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. The change was subtle, but undeniable. The direction of her gaze had shifted. I reached up, my fingers trembling slightly, and touched the heavy frame. It was solidly fixed to the wall. No give, no sign it had moved. I tried to dismiss it. Old houses, settling walls. My own anxiety painting phantoms on the canvas. I spent the day hunting for work, the image of those watchful eyes lingering in the back of my mind. But the exhaustion returned that night, and I crawled into bed, deliberately avoiding looking at the portrait, focusing instead on the cracks in the ceiling until sleep claimed me. I woke to the sound of my own heartbeat. It was deep in the night, the kind of silence so profound it feels like pressure on your eardrums. The city's usual hum was absent, muffled by a thick fog that had rolled in off the river. I didn't know what had woken me. No sound, no movement, just a feeling, a prickle on the back of my neck. Slowly, dreading what I might see, I turned my head towards the wall above the bed. The portrait was facing me directly, head on. Those dark painted eyes were fixed on mine with unnerving precision. The slight, cruel curve of her lips seemed more pronounced in the gloom. The thorny vines on the frame looked sharper, more menacing. A wave of cold, deeper than the room's chill, washed over me. My skin crawled. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a trick of the light. The painting had moved. While I slept, it had turned its head to look at me. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. I scrambled out of bed, fumbling for my phone, my fingers clumsy with fear. The screen's harsh light made me squint, but I needed proof. I aimed a camera at the portrait. The image on the screen showed the woman, head on, eyes staring unblinkingly into the lens. I took a picture, then another. I checked the timestamp. 2:47 a.m. I didn't sleep again. I sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in the thin blanket, my eyes locked on the portrait, waiting for it to move again. It didn't. It just watched. The feeling of being observed was so intense it was physical, a weight pressing on my chest. dawn felt like a reprieve. The next day I confronted Mrs. Gable. I found her in the dim, cluttered lobby, sorting through a stack of envelopes. "The portrait," I said, my voice tight. "In the bedroom. It's moving." She didn't look up. Her gnarled fingers kept sorting. "Moving? Nonsense!" But her voice lacked its usual gravelly confidence. There was a hesitation, a flicker of something, fear, in her rheumy eyes. "It's turning its head," I insisted, showing her the photo on my phone. "Look, at 2:47 this morning, it was facing the wall when I went to sleep." She peered at the screen, then looked away sharply, as if the image burned. "That's Eleanor Vance," she muttered, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Lived here in the 1890s, owned the whole building, died unhappily." She swallowed. "She didn't like guests, especially not in her room. She always said her portrait should watch over the space, keep things proper." She finally met my eyes, her gaze intense. "Don't look at it when you go to sleep. Don't acknowledge it. Just pretend it's not there. And for God's sake, don't take it down. She doesn't like that." She turned back to her envelopes, a clear dismissal. The conversation was over. Her warning only deepened the dread. Don't acknowledge it. But how could I not? Those eyes were a constant, silent accusation. I tried. I went to bed facing the wall, pulling the pillow over my head, but sleep was impossible. I could feel its gaze on the back of my skull, a cold, insistent pressure. On the third night, I couldn't take it. I got up, grabbed a large sheet I'd found in a closet, and threw it over the portrait, tucking the corners tightly around the frame until the entire painting was shrouded in dusty white linen. The relief was immediate, almost dizzying. The oppressive weight in the room lifted. I slept soundly for the first time since moving in. I woke to silence. Not the peaceful silence of before, but a thick, waiting quiet. And the sheet was on the floor, neatly folded as if someone had carefully removed it and placed it at the foot of the bed. The portrait was uncovered, and it was facing me again, not just head-on. Its head was tilted slightly, the painted eyes narrowed, the ghost of a smile now looking distinctly smug. A fresh wave of terror, colder and more profound than before, washed over me. It wasn't just watching. It was reacting. It was offended. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in the armchair I'd dragged into the bedroom, a baseball bat I'd bought that day resting across my lap, my eyes fixed on the portrait. The hours crawled by. Midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. The fog pressed against the window, muting the world outside into a silent gray void. The only sound was the frantic thudding of my own heart and the occasional groan of the old building. I must have dozed off, slumped in the chair for a moment. Just a moment. I woke with a jolt. The room was colder, much colder. My breath plumed in the air. And the portrait, it wasn't just turned towards me, it was leaning forward. The angle of the head was sharper, more aggressive. The painted eyes seemed darker, deeper, like pools of ink that could swallow you whole. The smug expression was gone, replaced by something far worse. Hunger. A cold, patient hunger. The thorny vines on the frame seemed to writhe subtly, as if straining against the wood. I couldn't stay. I couldn't. I gathered my few belongings in a frantic rush, stuffing clothes into my backpack. I avoided looking at the wall. I just needed to get out the door. As I shouldered the pack and turned towards the bedroom exit, my peripheral vision caught movement. Not on the wall, on the canvas itself. The painted eyes had tracked me. They weren't fixed on the center of the room anymore. They were locked onto my moving form, following me as I headed for the door. A whimper escaped my lips. I ran. I didn't stop until I was 3 blocks away, leaning against a lamppost, gasping for breath in the damp night air. I'd sleep on a friend's couch. Anywhere but there. But the next morning, bleary-eyed and hollow, I realized I'd left my wallet on the dresser, my ID, my last bit of cash, my only credit card. Groaning, I knew I had to go back just for a minute. In the daylight, with sunlight streaming through the grimy windows, the apartment felt different, less threatening. The portrait hanging above the bed looked inert, just an old painting of a stern woman. The terror of the night seemed absurd in the clear light. "It's just paint and canvas," I told myself firmly. "You're being ridiculous." I grabbed the wallet from the dresser, my eyes deliberately averted from the wall. I was almost out the door when curiosity, that fatal human flaw, got the better of me. Just a quick look, to prove to myself it was nothing. I turned. The portrait was facing the window again, as it had been on the first night. Relief, warm and sweet, flooded me. It was over. My mind had played tricks in the dark. I'd imagined it all. I practically skipped down the 3 flights of stairs, the heavy front door of the building closing behind me with a solid thud. Freedom. That night, on my friend's lumpy sofa, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. No cold pressure, no watchful eyes, just blessed ordinary sleep. I stayed with my friend for a week, using the time to finally land a temp job, enough to scrape together first and last month's rent on a tiny ground-floor studio across town. A place with no portraits, no history, just clean walls and fluorescent lights. The night before I was due to move into my new place, I was packing the last of my things from my friend's apartment. It was late. Rain lashed against the windows. My friend was already asleep. I was alone in the living room, folding a sweater, when I felt it again. That prickle on the back of my neck, that cold pressure. My blood ran cold. I slowly turned my head. There, propped against the far wall, leaning in the shadowed corner behind my friend's bookshelf, was the portrait, Eleanor Vance. Her eyes, impossibly dark and real in the low lamplight, were fixed on me. Her head was tilted at that familiar hungry angle. The thorny vines on the frame seemed to pulse in the gloom. How? I hadn't brought it. I'd left it hanging in that cursed room. Panic, pure and icy, seized me. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the painting. My friend's apartment door was behind me. I fumbled for the handle, my hand slick with sweat. I yanked it open and stumbled out into the dimly lit hallway, slamming the door shut and leaning against it, gasping. I spent the rest of the night huddled in the hallway, too terrified to go back in, too terrified to be alone anywhere else. Moving into the new studio was supposed to be my fresh start. I chose a plain, modern building with wide hallways and bright lights. My bedroom was small but spotless, with a single unadorned wall above the bed. Perfect. Safe. I slept deeply that first night, utterly exhausted, but finally free of the weight of those eyes. Or so I thought. I woke just before dawn. The room was filled with a soft, gray light. And there, hanging dead center on the blank wall above my new bed, was the portrait of Eleanor Vance. The heavy, thorny frame looked utterly out of place against the smooth beige paint. It hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I hadn't hung it. No one else had a key. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall onto the floor, staring up at the painting in numb horror. Her head wasn't just turned towards me. It was tilted forward, straining off the canvas. Her dark eyes held a terrifying new depth, a swirling vortex of cold malice and ancient hunger. The ghost of a smile was gone. Her painted lips were slightly parted, as if whispering secrets only the dead could hear. The air in the room was frigid, my breath a constant plume. And then, slowly, deliberately, the painted eyes blinked. A choked sob escaped me. I scrambled backwards on the floor until my back hit the opposite wall. The portrait watched me cower. It didn't need to move its head anymore. It was already looking directly at me, its presence of physical force in the small room. The hunger in its eyes wasn't just for attention. It was for something deeper, for warmth, for life, for the soul that animated the body lying frozen on the floor before it. The thorny vines on the frame seemed to writhe with a life of their own, stretching subtly towards the edge of the canvas, towards the room, towards me. The silence was absolute, thick with the promise of the cold that would never leave, the watchfulness that would never end. I was home, and she was finally, truly looking at me, not just watching, claiming. The slow turning of her head at night was over. Her gaze was fixed, permanent, and the chilling realization settled into my bones, colder than the air, colder than death. I would never look away again. She wouldn't allow it. The portrait above my bed didn't just turn its head. It had turned me. And now I belonged to the silence, to the cold, to those endless, hungry eyes that would watch forever from the wall. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. The church bell rings for funerals that haven't happened yet. The listing was buried deep in a regional job board, sandwiched between hay baling assistant needed and retired gentleman seeks companion for museum visits. It read, simply, bell ringer required, St. Sylvanus Church, Hollows End, temporary position, 30 days, $2,800. Duties, maintain bell tower, perform daily noon chime, ensure structural integrity. Sole occupant, quiet location. Applicant must be self-sufficient, respectful of sacred space, and untroubled by solitude. Inquiries. Sextonist.sylvanus.org. $800 for 30 days of ringing a bell. Hollows End wasn't on my map, an unincorporated speck in the northern Adirondack foothills, accessible only by a single, winding county road that dissolved into gravel after 20 miles. But the money was real. The email exchange with the sexton, a terse-typed name, no signature, was clinical, efficient. A background check cleared. Standard for church work, they said. A train ticket to the nearest depot, 2 hours away, appeared in my inbox. Paid for. Instructions. Take the 7:15 a.m. bus to Hollows End Crossroads. Someone will meet you. The bus dropped me at a rusted signpost beside a dirt track, vanishing into dense pine forest. No one was there. Just the sigh of wind in the branches and the distant cry of a hawk. I waited 20 minutes, duffel bag at my feet, before a battered pickup truck rattled into view. The driver was an old man, face a road map of wrinkles, eyes the color of river stones. He didn't speak, just jerked his chin toward the passenger seat. We bounced in silence for 10 minutes, the track narrowing until the trees parted. St. Sylvanus wasn't picturesque. It was stark. A small gray stone church, roof patched with tar paper, squatting in a clearing dominated by a single massive oak tree. Behind it, a lopsided wooden structure, the bell tower, leaned precariously, its shingles warped by decades of snow and rain. A small cemetery sprawled to the left, headstones tilted like broken teeth, choked with tall, dry grass. No town, no houses, just the church, the tower, the grave markers, and the wall of pines pressing close. Oppressive, silent. The old man stopped the truck. He handed me a heavy iron key tied with twine and a folded sheet of paper. His voice was a dry rasp. "Sexton's instructions. Tower's yours. Sleeping quarters upstairs behind the belfry. Food's in the cellar, canned goods. Pump out back for water. Bell ropes in the tower. Only ring at noon. Only the single chime. Don't touch nothing else. Don't go in the church. Don't walk the grounds after dark." He started the engine. "Bell rings when it rings. You just listen and log it." He drove off, leaving me alone in clearing, the key cold in my palm, the silence so deep it hummed in my ears. The tower's interior smelled of dust, dry rot, and old wood smoke. Narrow, steep stairs spiraled up. The sleeping quarters was a cramped loft under the eaves, just big enough for a narrow cot, a small table, and a kerosene lamp. A single grimy window overlooked the church roof and the cemetery. The belfry itself was one level down, dominated by the bell, a massive, pitted bronze thing, easily 6 feet tall, suspended on thick wooden beams. Its clapper hung motionless. 2 thick braided hemp ropes dangled beside it, ending in worn wooden handles. The sexton's instructions were clear: 1 pull, noon, single chime, log time, duration, weather. That first noon, I pulled the rope. The bell's voice was deep, resonant, a sound that didn't just fill the air but vibrated in my chest, rolling out over the pines, shaking the dust from the rafters. Bong! A single, pure, mournful note that hung in the still air for a full 10 seconds before dissolving into silence. I logged it. 12 plash, clear, 10-sec duration, standard chime. That night, the silence returned, deeper, heavier. I lay on a cot, listening to the wind, the creak of the old timbers. Just after 2 a.m. it started, a low, rhythmic groan, not from the wind, from above me, from the belfry, the bell rope beside my cot, the one not connected to the clapper, the one the instructions called the silent rope, was moving, slowly, gently, swinging in a tiny arc as if brushed by an unfelt breeze. Groan, creak, groan, creak. The sound of the rope rubbing against the wooden beam it passed through on its way up to the bell. I sat up, heart pounding, draft, settling wood. But the tower felt still, stale. I watched the rope swing back and forth, 5 minutes, 10. It didn't stop. It just groaned. Then, without warning, the rope went taut, pulled up, hard. The thick hemp stretched taut as a bowstring. The wooden beam it ran through groaned in protest. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. And the bell spoke, not the single noon chime, a full, heavy, deliberate toll, bong, a pause, 2 seconds, bong, another pause, longer, bong. The sound was deeper, slower, infinitely sadder than the noon chime, a funeral knell, 3 strokes, the universal signal of death. I stood frozen, bare feet on the cold wood floor, staring at the taut rope. Impossible. No one was up there, no mechanism, just rope and bell and wind. But there was no wind. The rope hung perfectly still after the 3rd toll, then slowly, gently, began its soft groan, creak, Swing again. I scrambled for the logbook the sexton had included. 02:17 a.m., unprompted bell activation. 3 tolls, funeral cadence, source, silent rope tension, no visible cause, weather, calm, no wind. The next day, noon chime, normal. Bong. That night, 1:48 a.m., the rope groaned, went taut. Bong, bong, bong. 3 tolls, same log entry, different time. The third night, 3:02 a.m., same thing. 3 tolls, a pattern, a schedule. Only the bell knew. On the 4th day, curiosity overrode fear. After the noon chime, I climbed the ladder into the belfry itself. Daylight streamed through the louved openings, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I examined the bell. Ancient, pitted bronze, inscription around the rim, worn almost smooth. Memento Mori, 1843. Remember you must die. Charming. I traced the ropes. The working rope, thick, slightly frayed, connected directly to the clapper's lever. The silent rope, identical hemp. But its end vanished into a dark hole in the beam above, leading where? I'd assumed it was just a counterweight, or perhaps a secondary disused mechanism. But the hole was small, too small for a counterweight pulley. I poked my head through the trap door into the very peak of the tower above the belfry. A cramped, cobweb-choked attic space, empty, just rafters, dust, and the end of the silent rope, tied off securely to a heavy iron ring, bolted into the main ridge beam. No mechanism, no hidden lever, just rope, tied fast. How? How could a rope tied off above pull down with enough force to swing a multi-ton bell? Physics screamed impossible. That night, the tolls came earlier, 12:55 a.m. Bong, bong, bong. I didn't log it right away. I stood in the belfry doorway, looking down at the rope as it swung gently, groaning. Then, on impulse, I stepped into the belfry, walked to the silent rope, reached out. My fingers closed around the rough hemp. It was ice cold and vibrating, a faint, deep thrum, like the echo of the toll still resonating in the fibers. I pulled, gently. Nothing. I pulled harder. The rope didn't budge. It was anchored, immovable, solid as the tower itself. I released it. The groaning started again. Groan, creak. The rope swung. Then, with that same impossible, invisible force, it went taut, pulled up, and the bell tolled. Bong! I was standing right there. I saw the rope pull upwards into the hole in the beam, saw the clapper swing out, strike the bell. No hidden hand, no ghostly figure, just the rope obeying a command from nowhere. Bong! The third toll hung in the air, a wave of sound pressing against my skin, filling the tower, rolling out into the dark pines. As it faded, a new sound emerged, not from the bell, but from the cemetery below. A single, dry crack. Like old wood splitting or stone shifting, I rushed to the belfry window, peering down. In the moonlight, one grave marker, a tall, weathered slab near the oak tree, had tilted further. A fresh fracture ran down its center. The next day, I broke protocol. I walked the cemetery, not after dark. At noon, in the weak sun, the sexton's warning echoed. Don't walk the grounds after dark. He hadn't said, don't walk them at all. The headstones were old, pre-1900 mostly, names worn away by time and acid rain. Here lies beloved wife, infant son. Standard, sad, but normal, except for one. Near the back, half swallowed by ferns, stood a newer marker, granite, not slate, less weathered. The inscription was clear. Elara Vance, beloved daughter, born April 12, 1998, gone. The death date was blank, a long smooth groove where the chisel should have carved the numbers, as if the stone cutter had stopped, unable to finish. A chill, deeper than the mountain air, touched my spine. Elara Vance, born 1998. So, 25, still alive? Then why a grave marker? Why the blank date? That night, the bell didn't toll at its usual time. It waited. 11:58 p.m., I was in the loft, logbook open, pen in hand, waiting. The silence was a physical wait. Groan. The rope began its swing. Groan. Creak. I watched it, my pulse a frantic drum in my ears. 11:59 p.m. The rope went taut, pulled, up, bong. The sound was heavier, fuller, laden with a sorrow that made my eyes sting. Bong. I was at the belfry window, looking down at Elara Vance's grave. Bong. As the third toll boomed out, a sound came from the earth itself, a low, grinding rumble, not thunder, deeper, closer. In the moonlight, the granite slab of Elara Vance's marker shifted, not tilted, not cracked. It rose an inch, then two, pushing up from the earth as if something beneath was straining upwards. Dirt cascaded from its base. The bell's final echo faded. The rope went slack. The marker settled back down, not to its original position. It stood perfectly upright now, and in the smooth groove where the death date had been blank, freshly carved, the granite dust still sparkling in the moonlight, were three numbers. Just 13. Not a full date, just the day. June 13th, tomorrow. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled back to the loft, fumbling for the logbook. My hand shook so badly the pen skittered. 23:59, unprompted activation, 3 tolls. Funeral cadence. Observed. Concurrent ground displacement at gravesite. Elara Vance. Plot 47. Marker, elevated approx. 2 inches. Fresh inscription observed post-toll. 13. Presumed date, June 3rd. Cause unknown. Request immediate clarification from sexton. I sent the email from the satellite phone the sexton had provided for emergencies. It connected instantly. The reply arrived 3 minutes later. One line. Observe. Log. Do not interfere. Sexton, do not interfere. The bell hadn't tolled for a death. It had tolled before it. It was announcing a death that hadn't happened yet. Elara Vance, born 1998, would die tomorrow. I didn't sleep. I watched the moon track across the window, waited for dawn, waited for noon, waited for what? Would the bell toll again at midnight? Would the marker sink back down? Would the 13 vanish? Noon came. I pulled the working rope. Bong! The single chime, hollow and meaningless now. The day dragged. I paced the tower, stared at the cemetery, jumped at every rustle in the pines. Nothing happened. The marker stood upright. The 13, stark in the sunlight. 11:58 p.m. I was waiting in the belfry, leaning against the cold bell, the silent rope inches from my hand. Groan, creak. It began. The rope swung, slow, deliberate. 11:59 p.m. Taut, pulled, up, bong. The sound vibrated through the soles of my boots. I looked down at Elara Vance's grave. Bong. The marker didn't move. Bong. As the third toll faded, a new sound cut through the silence. Not from the ground, from the church. A door creaked open, the heavy oak door of St. Sylvanus itself, untouched since I'd arrived, swung slowly, silently, inward. Darkness yawned within, and from that darkness a figure emerged. A woman, young, mid-20s, long dark hair, pale face, wearing simple jeans and a faded sweater. She walked with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. She didn't look at the tower. She walked straight to Elara Vance's grave. She knelt, placed a single wild white flower, a Queen Anne's lace, on the mound of fresh earth at the marker's base. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. I knew with a certainty that stole my breath who she was. Elara Vance, alive, grieving herself. She stayed for 5 minutes, then stood, brushed the dirt from her knees, and walked back to the church. The door closed softly behind her. No sound of a lock, just closure. The rope in the belfry hung slack. I didn't log it, not right away. The sexton's words burned in my mind. Do not interfere. But how do you not interfere with a woman mourning her own future grave? The next night, June 14th, the bell was silent. No groaning rope, no tolls. I watched Elara's grave all night. The marker stood upright. The 13 remained. Dawn came, weak light. I climbed down from the tower, my body stiff, my mind racing. I had to know. Protocol be damned. I walked to the church door. It opened easily. Inside, the air was cold, smelling of dust and old hymnals. Pews lined the center aisle. A simple altar, no electricity, just weak light from high, stained glass windows. And sitting in the front pew, staring at the altar, was Elara Vance. She looked exhausted, hollow-eyed. She didn't turn as I entered. Elara? My voice sounded loud, intrusive. She flinched, then slowly turned. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear, intelligent, haunted. "You're the bell ringer," she said. Her voice was soft, raspy. "They sent a new one. Arthur Ellis, I saw you last night, at the grave." A flicker of pain crossed her face. "Yeah, I go every night, after it rings." The bell, it tolled for June 13th, but it's the 14th now. She looked down at her hands, twisting in her lap. "It tolls before, always before. St. Sylvanus. It doesn't mark the dead, Mr. Ellis. It marks the dying, the ones whose time is fixed, written." She gestured vaguely towards the tower. "The bell knows. It rings the day before. 3 tolls for the soul." "How?" The word came out strangled. She shrugged a small, helpless movement. "The Vance family, we're tied to this place, since the beginning. The sexton's family, too. Keepers of the stone, keepers of the bell." She looked up, her gaze piercing. "My mother, she knew. When the bell tolled for her, 3 nights running, she packed a suitcase, drove to the city, got hit by a bus on June 12th, bell tolled on the 11th. A tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "My grandfather, heart attack, right here in the pews. Bell tolled the night before. And you? June 13th came and went." A bitter smile touched her lips. "The bell tolled. The marker got its date. I prepared, said goodbye to the world, waited." She tapped her left leg. "This old injury, the doctor said it could flare, cause a clot, pulmonary embolism, quick, silent." She looked at the altar. "I sat here all yesterday, waiting for the pain, the darkness. It didn't come." She turned back to me, her eyes wide with a terrifying mix of relief and dread. "The bell was wrong." The word hung in the dusty air. Wrong. A sacred, ancient thing, a harbinger of absolute fate. Wrong. "What happens," I whispered, "when the bell is wrong?" Elara's face went utterly white. "I don't know. It's never happened. The sexton, he'll know. He has to know." She stood up, swaying slightly. "I have to find him. He lives down the old logging road, past the river bend." She started toward the door, then stopped, looking back at me, her expression pleading. Don't ring the noon bell today, Mr. Ellis. Please, just wait." She hurried out, vanishing into the pines. I stood alone in the silent church, the weight of her fear pressing down on me. Don't ring the noon bell. But the instructions were absolute. Perform daily noon chime. The contract, the money, the sexton's cold authority. Noon approached, 11:55, 11:58. I climbed the tower stairs. My legs felt like lead. The belfry seemed colder. The silent rope hung motionless. 11:59. I stood before the working rope, the worn wooden handle. My hand trembled. Pull it. Protocol. Duty. Don't pull it. Alara's plea, the terror in her eyes, the blank space where fate had faltered. 12 hours. I closed my eyes and pulled. Bong. The single clear chime echoed out, a sound of order, of routine, of a world where rules held. It felt like a betrayal. The rope hadn't finished its swing back when the silent rope groaned. I spun, groan, creak, groan. It swung, faster than before, agitated. Then, with a force that made the beam shudder, it went taut, pulled up. Not a slow, deliberate pull. A yank. The bell didn't toll. It screamed. A single, shattering, dissonant brrrr of tortured metal. Sound of pure agony that ripped through the tower, shattering 2 panes in the belfry windows, sending dust and splinters raining down. It wasn't a funeral knell. It was a wail, or a sound of wrongness, of violation. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my skull, vibrating my teeth, my bones. It lasted only 3 seconds, but it felt like an eternity of pure sonic terror. Then, silence. Deeper, more absolute than any silence before. The rope hung slack, broken. The end that vanished into the beam was severed, a clean, sharp cut, as if sliced by a wire. The frayed hemp end dangled limp. From the cemetery below, a sound like 100 dry branches snapping at once. I stumbled to the window. Every grave marker in the cemetery, the old slate, the newer granite, had fractured, not tilted, shattered. Headstones lay in pieces. The earth between the graves was churned, heaved upwards in ragged mounds, as if something vast and furious had clawed its way towards the surface and been denied. And in the center of the chaos, where Alara Vance's grave had been, only a gaping hole, dark, empty, the granite marker, the fresh earth, the wildflower, gone, swallowed. The sexton's truck rattled into the clearing an hour later. He got out, his face grim, older than I remembered. He didn't look at the shattered cemetery. He walked straight to the tower, climbed the stairs without a word, and stood in the belfry doorway, looking at the severed rope. He picked up the broken end, his fingers tracing the clean cut. His voice, when he finally spoke, was devoid of its usual rasp. It was hollow, defeated. "You rang it." I had to. Protocol. Protocol is dust." He dropped the rope, looked at me, his river-stone eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. "The bell doesn't just announce the dying, boy. It anchors them. 3 tolls? It fixes the moment, makes it clean, peaceful, a door opening." He gestured towards the shattered cemetery. "When the bell is silent on the day, or when it is forced to ring when it should not," he shook his head, "the anchor fails, the door doesn't open, it shatters." "Alara?" "Gone," he said flatly, "not dead, unmade. The earth took back what the bell failed to release. No grave, no marker, no memory, just absence." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your duty is done, Mr. Ellis. Payment will be deposited. Leave today. Take the bus at noon." He started down the stairs, then stopped, his voice barely a whisper, drifting up. "The bell will be silent now. It has no more names to call. The list is broken." He left. I packed my duffel in numb silence. The bus came. I didn't look back at St. Sylvanus, at the leaning tower, at the field of broken stones. A week later, the money appeared in my account. $2,800, and an email. Final log entry required. Sexton. I opened the logbook, flipped past the entries of tolls and dates and terror. To the last page, I picked up the pen. My hand didn't shake. I wrote, June 14th, 12 o'clock. Noon chime performed, bell subsequently malfunctioned, silent rope severed, catastrophic ground displacement observed in cemetery. One gravesite, Elara Vance, plot 47, fully excavated. Subject, Elara Vance. Status, unmade. I stopped, looked at the words. Unmade. Below it, I added one final line, not for the sexton, for myself, for the silence. The bell is quiet now. I closed the logbook. The weight of it felt different. Not a record of duty. A tombstone for a girl who never died, for a future that never was, for the terrible, hollow silence where a funeral bell should have rung. And with that, this story comes to an end. Let's move on to the next one. The elevator in my apartment stops on a floor that doesn't exist. The ad said, modern high-rise living, floor-to-ceiling views, secure building, $150 month. The photos showed gleaming of chrome, polished marble, and a cityscape glittering like scattered diamonds. The reality of the Alden Towers lobby was less gleaming. The chrome was smudged, the marble scuffed, and the diamonds outside were distant, hazy under the city's perpetual smog. But it was affordable, and the view from the 14th floor studio was decent. Sarah had just left. Artie, I need space. I need to figure out me. And the silence of my old place was suffocating. The Alden Tower offered anonymity, a blank slate, a place to disappear. The building felt old beneath its cheap modern veneer. The corridor smelled of lemon floor wax and something older, drier, like paper left too long in an attic. My apartment, Lamar 407, was functional. Compact kitchen, Murphy bed, a decent bathroom. The only oddity was the elevator. It was a single, ancient cage elevator, brass and iron, its doors heavy and slow to close. A brass plaque beside the call button read, Otis Est, Nyan Tau 27, servicing floors 114. Simple, clear. My first week was uneventful. Work, freelance copy editing, mostly obituaries, ironic. Groceries, takeout, silence. The elevator groaned and clanked its way up and down, a familiar, reassuring rhythm. Ding. Doors open. Clunk, clunk, clunk. Our doors close. Up to 14. Down to lobby. Then, on a Tuesday night, returning late from a pointless walk, I pressed 14. The elevator rose smoothly past 2, 3, 4. The familiar ding at 5, 6, 7. It passed 10, 11, 12. Ding at 13. The doors began to close. They stopped, halfway shut. A soft, almost apologetic ping sounded. Not the bright ding of the other floors, but a lower, mellower tone, like a struck tuning fork. The indicator panel above the doors flickered. The 13 went out. A new symbol appeared. Not a number, a dash. The doors, with a soft hydraulic sigh, slid fully open. I stared. The hallway beyond wasn't the Alden Towers' beige carpet and fluorescent tubes. It was dark wood paneling, worn smooth by time. A single, ornate sconce cast a weak, yellow pool of light on a faded Persian rug. The air that drifted in was cool, still, and carried the scent of beeswax, old paper, and dried lavender. And silence. A deep, velvety silence that felt occupied. No doors were visible in the short stretch of hall I could see. Just the rug, the paneling, the sconce, and darkness beyond the light's edge. My finger hovered over the door-close button. My heart hammered against my ribs. Mechanical glitch, sensor fault, stuck between floors. The rationalizations were automatic, thin. I pressed door close. The doors didn't move. I pressed it again. Harder. Nothing. I jabbed the 14 button. The indicator flickered. The remained. A bead of sweat traced a cold path down my temple. I looked back at the impossible hallway. The silence wasn't empty. It felt expectant. Then, from the darkness beyond the sconce's light, a sound, a soft creak, like a floorboard yielding under weight. A pause, another creak, closer. Something was coming down the hall. Panic, pure and electric, shot through me. I slammed my palm against the door close button over and over. Clunk. The doors began to move, slowly, reluctantly, sliding shut. As the gap narrowed, I saw it. At the edge of the light, a hand, pale, slender, resting on the dark wood wall for balance. Then the door sealed with a final solid thunk. The elevator lurched upwards. Ding, 14. I stumbled out, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice. I slammed my apartment door, locked it, chained it, and leaned against it, gasping, listening to the frantic drumming of my own heart. Hallucination, sleep deprivation, stress. I replayed it. The wood paneling, the lavender smell, the hand. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Yeah, my elevator opens to Narnia, but with more beeswax. The next day, I took the stairs. For a week, I avoided the elevator. 12 flights up, 12 down. My legs burned, my lungs screamed. But it was safe, predictable, until the rain. A downpour. I was soaked, shivering, groceries disintegrating in wet paper bags. The stairs were a waterlogged nightmare. I stood in the lobby, dripping onto the scuffed marble, staring at the brass call button. One ride. Just one. It was a glitch, a one-time thing. I pressed a button. The elevator descended with its usual groan. Doors opened. Empty. I stepped in, hit 410, and held my breath as the doors closed. It rose smoothly. 2, 3, 4. Ding. 5, 6, 7. It passed. 10, 11, 12. Ding. 13. The doors started to close. Ping. The 13 vanished. The appeared. The doors slid open. The dark wood hall. The Persian rug. The sconce. The scent of lavender and old paper. No hand this time, just the silence and the waiting. I didn't hesitate. I lunged for the control panel, hammering, door close, 14, lobby, anything. The doors remained open. The silence deepened. From the darkness, a new sound. Not a footstep, a voice. Faint, dry, like pages turning in an abandoned library, a single word whispered on a breath of cold air. Ellis. My blood froze. My name, not shouted, not hissed, just stated, a fact, a recognition. How did it know my name? The voice came again, closer now, the syllables precise, archaic. The ledger awaits. Ledger? The word triggered a memory, vague, unpleasant, of a green leather book, ink blots, a child's voice asking, "Are you signed?" A fragment of a nightmare? Or something else? Panic surged, white-hot. I threw my weight against the elevator doors, trying to force them shut manually. They didn't budge, solid as stone. Then a soft thump from the hall. Something landed on the rug just outside the elevator. A book, bound in cracked dark green leather, brass corners tarnished. A heavy, old-fashioned fountain pen lay beside it, uncapped, a single drop of black ink glistening on its nib. The guest log from the nightmare, from the wren and ivy. Impossible. I'd left that place behind, buried it. The voice whispered, so close now it seemed to come from inside the elevator car itself, from the air beside my ear. Sign. Balance must be kept. My eyes darted from the book to the control panel. My finger found the emergency stop button, a large red mushroom switch I'd never noticed before, tucked beneath the floor selector. I slammed my palm down on it, a harsh grating "Cal Axon" blared inside the car, deafening in the confined space. The lights flickered violently. The turquoise on the indicator panel blinked out. The elevator lurched, groaned, and began to descend, fast. The door slammed shut as it dropped. Ding. Lobby. The doors opened onto the familiar scuffed marble and lemon wax smell. Normalcy. Safety. I stumbled out, gasping, the klaxon still echoing in my skull. I didn't look back. I ran for the stairs, taking them two at a time, heart pounding, the phantom scent of lavender clinging to my clothes. In my apartment, I locked the door, drew the blinds, and sat on the floor back against the wall, breathing hard. Ledger, balance, sign. The words from the nightmare bleeding into reality. Was I losing my mind? Was the stress of Sarah leaving, the isolation finally cracking me open? I needed proof. Tangible proof it wasn't just me. The next morning, armed with my phone's video function, I stood before the elevator doors on the 14th floor. My hand trembled as I pressed the call button. The elevator arrived. Empty. I stepped in, pointed the phone at the control panel, and pressed lobby. It descended smoothly. Ding. 13. The doors started to close. Ping. 13 vanished. Appeared. Doors opened. I swung the phone around. The screen showed the dark wood hall, the rug, the sconce. Clear. Unmistakable. Not a trick of the light. Not a reflection. I panned down. The green ledger lay on the rug, the pen beside it. A shaky whisper escaped me, captured by the phone's mic. Oh, God. From the darkness, the dry, papery voice. Arthur, the next guest. The phone screen flickered. Static snowed across the image for a split second. When it cleared, the ledger and pen were gone. The doors remained open. I fumbled for the emergency stop. Too late. A soft creak in the hall. Closer. I hit record again, swinging the phone towards an opening. The screen showed the edge of the rug and a foot. Pale. Bare. The skin looked dry, almost dusty. Toes curled slightly. It took a step forward, entering the frame. The phone's battery icon flashed red. 0%. The screen went black. The elevator lights flickered. On the panel blinked out. The doors slammed shut. Ding. Lobby. I stood frozen in the empty lobby, phone dead in my hand. The image of that dusty foot burned onto my retinas. Proof. I had proof, and it was worse than nothing. That night, I couldn't stay in the apartment. The silence pressed in, thick with the imagined scent of lavender. Every creak of the building sounded like a footstep in a dark hall. I packed a bag, just essentials, and headed for the elevator. I'd get a hotel, sleep, find a therapist in the morning. I pressed lobby. The elevator descended. 13. Ding. Ping. Top doors opened. The hall was different, brighter. The sconce's light seemed stronger, revealing more of the corridor. It ended not in darkness, but at a heavy, dark wood door. Paneled. Brass fittings. A small brass plaque was screwed into the center. My blood turned to ice. The plaque read, "The Wren and Ivy." The door stood slightly ajar. From within, a faint, tinny melody drifted out. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. The music box, and beneath it, a woman's voice, soft, sorrowful, singing wordless lullabies. Hush-a-bye. Eleanor Voss, the voice from the dream, the nightmare, the memory. It wasn't a memory. It was a place. The Alden's Tower wasn't just haunted. It was a junction, a thin place, where the walls between realities were worn paper thin and the rules of one bled into the next. The elevator wasn't malfunctioning, it was transporting. To the places I'd tried to forget, to the covenants I'd signed in ink and fear. The voice came, not from the hall now, but from inside my own head, clear and cold as a winter stream. The balance requires completion, Mr. Ellis, a name, a real name, someone who will come, someone you can invite. Sarah's face flashed in my mind, her laugh, her tired eyes the day she left. I need space, Artie. The ledger wasn't in the hall this time. It was in my hands. I hadn't picked it up. It was just there, cold leather against my palms. The pen, heavy and cold, lay across its open cover. The page was fresh, blank. At the top, in Eleanor's precise script, the next guest. Beneath it, a single line waiting to be filled. My hand moved, not towards the emergency stop, towards the pen. It felt like destiny, like gravity, like the only way to silence the crying in the wall, the tapping on the door, the relentless, gentle rocking of an empty crib. My fingers closed around the cold metal. The music box played on. Twinkle, twinkle. The lullaby softened. Sign. The voice whispered, a sigh of relief, of anticipation. I looked down at the blank line. My hand didn't shake. The ink flowed, black and thick. I wrote 2 words, not a name, a plea, a delay, a sliver of hope that this wasn't the end, but a terrible, necessary beginning. Not yet. I closed the ledger. The music box stopped. The lullaby ceased. The elevator light steadied. On the panel, vanished. Ding. Lobby. The doors opened onto the familiar scuffed marble. I stepped out. The ledger was gone. The pen was gone. But the cold weight in my chest remained. I didn't go to a hotel. I walked back up the 12 flights to Navajo Wharf 107. I unlocked the door, closed it softly behind me. I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the dark living room, listening to the silence of the Alden Tower. It wasn't empty silence anymore. It was the silence of waiting, of expectation, of a ledger somewhere in the walls, on a floor that didn't exist, holding a single, desperate line. Not yet. And beneath it, the space waiting for a name. The elevator would call again. It always did. And next time, my hand might not hesitate. The balance must be kept.